In the dense jungles of Southeast Asia lies one of history's most magnificent mysteries, the ruins of Angkor, once the beating heart of an empire that dominated the region for over 6 centuries. Imagine a civilization so advanced that its capital city housed nearly 1 million people when London barely reached 50,000. Picture temple complexes so vast they dwarf any religious structure built in medieval Europe. Envision hydraulic engineering systems so sophisticated they transformed hostile jungle into the rice bowl of Asia. This is the story of the Khmer Empire, a tale of divine kings and warrior queens, of architectural marvels that defy comprehension, and of a sophisticated society that mastered the monsoons themselves. From humble beginnings along the Mekong River to becoming the dominant force in Southeast Asia, the Khmer created a civilization that would influence the region for millennia. Yet this mighty empire, which once commanded tribute from Thailand to Vietnam, vanished into the jungle's embrace, leaving behind only stone sentinels to guard its secrets. What forces could topple such a colossus? How did a civilization capable of building Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument in human history, simply disappear from the world stage? Over the next chapters, we'll unravel this epic saga of rise and ruin, exploring how geography shaped destiny, how religion molded reality, and how the very innovations that lifted the Khmer to unprecedented heights ultimately contributed to their downfall. This is more than history. It's a mirror reflecting timeless truths about power, prosperity, and the price of paradise. Our journey begins not with kings or temples, but with water and rice. The story of the Khmer Empire is fundamentally a story of how one people learned to dance with the monsoons, transforming the challenging landscape of mainland Southeast Asia into the foundation of the most powerful empire the region had ever seen. In the first centuries of the Common Era, the lands that would become Cambodia were inhabited by various Austroasiatic peoples who had migrated from the north over millennia. These early inhabitants lived in small communities along riverbanks, practicing a mixture of hunting, gathering, and primitive agriculture. The Mekong River, that great artery of Southeast Asia, provided fish, transportation, and fertile soil deposited by annual floods. Yet these peoples remained fragmented, without the political unity or technological sophistication that would characterize their descendants. The transformation began with the arrival of Indian cultural influences, carried not by conquering armies, but by merchants and Brahmin priests. This process, which historians call Indianization, was not a sudden invasion, but a gradual adoption and adaptation of Indian religious, political, and agricultural concepts. The local peoples didn't simply copy Indian civilization, they created something entirely new by blending imported ideas with indigenous traditions. By the 2nd century CE, the first organized kingdoms began emerging in the lower Mekong region. Chinese chronicles speak of a kingdom called Funan by Chinese scribes, though its people likely knew it by another name lost to history. Funan controlled the Mekong Delta and the maritime trade routes connecting India to China. Its ports buzzed with merchants from across Asia, trading in precious stones, exotic woods, and aromatic resins. The rulers of Funan adopted Sanskrit names, Hindu and Buddhist religious practices, and Indian concepts of divine kingship while maintaining distinctly Southeast Asian characteristics. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ok-Eo reveals a sophisticated society with extensive canal systems, specialized craft production, and far-reaching trade networks. Gold coins bearing Sanskrit inscriptions, Roman medallions, and Chinese ceramics testify to Funan's role as a crucial intermediary in ancient maritime trade. The kingdom's engineers had already begun the tradition of hydraulic management that would later reach its zenith under the Khmer. As Funan prospered in the south, another power emerged in the middle Mekong region. The kingdom of Chenla, centered in what is now southern Laos and northeastern Cambodia, grew from a vassal state of Funan to eventually overshadow its former master. By the 6th century, Chenla had absorbed Funan's territories, creating a unified political entity that stretched from the South China Sea to the Korat Plateau. The rise of Chenla marked a crucial shift from maritime to terrestrial power. While Funan had focused on controlling sea routes, Chenla's strength lay in agricultural production and overland trade. This transition reflected broader changes in Southeast Asian commerce as overland routes through the mainland became increasingly important. Chenla's rulers continued the process of Indianization, adopting the Hindu god Shiva as their patron deity and establishing the concept of the Devaraja, the god-king, that would become central to Khmer political ideology. Yet Chenla's unity proved fragile. By the 8th century, the kingdom had split into Land Chenla in the north and Water Chenla in the south, names that reflected their different economic bases and geographical orientations. This division weakened both realms, making them vulnerable to external pressures. Javanese raiders struck from the sea while mountain peoples pressed from the highlands. The political fragmentation seemed to herald the end of Khmer aspirations for regional dominance. It was in this context of crisis and division that a young prince emerged who would change everything. His name was Jayavarman, and though he would later be known as Jayavarman II, at this moment he was merely one of many claimants to fragments of former glory. What set him apart was not just ambition. The ruins of Chenla bred many ambitious princes, but vision. He understood that reunifying the Khmer lands required more than military might. It demanded a new conception of kingship and a new relationship between ruler, realm, and the divine. The foundation was already there in the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The hydraulic engineering inherited from Funan, the agricultural techniques refined by Chenla, the synthesis of Indian and indigenous religious traditions, and perhaps most importantly, the idea that proper management of water could transform landscape and society alike. All these elements awaited someone with the genius to combine them into something greater than their sum. As the 8th century drew to a close, the stage was set for one of history's most remarkable transformations. The scattered communities along the Mekong were about to be forged into an empire that would endure for 600 years and leave monuments that still inspire awe today. The dawn of true Khmer civilization was at hand, waiting only for the catalyst that would spark its emergence from the ashes of Chenla's collapse. The year was 802 CE, and atop the sacred mountain of Phnom Kulen, a ceremony was taking place that would echo through the centuries. Jayavarman II, having spent years consolidating power across the fractured Khmer lands, was about to perform an act of political and spiritual genius that would transform him from a successful warlord into the founder of an empire. Through an elaborate ritual conducted by the Brahmin priest Sivakaivalya, he declared himself Chakravartin, universal ruler, and more audaciously established the cult of the Devaraja, proclaiming himself the earthly embodiment of Shiva. But who was this man who dared to claim divinity? Jayavarman II's early life remains shrouded in mystery, with chronicles offering tantalizing glimpses rather than clear narrative. We know he spent years in the Javanese court, either as a prince in exile or perhaps as a hostage. This period of foreign residence proved crucial, for when he returned to the Khmer lands around 790 CE, he brought with him not just Javanese military techniques, but a sophisticated understanding of statecraft and religious authority. His initial campaigns were methodical rather than meteoric. Beginning in the southeastern regions near the Great Lake of Tonle Sap, Jayavarman II systematically subdued local chiefs and petty kings. Unlike previous conquerors who had relied solely on military force, he employed a combination of warfare, diplomacy, and religious legitimation. He understood that lasting power required not just defeating enemies, but incorporating them into a new political order. The genius of the Devaraja cult lay in its synthesis of existing beliefs with innovative political theology. The concept built upon the indigenous ancestor worship and the Hindu-Buddhist ideas that had taken root over centuries. But Jayavarman II's innovation was to make the king not merely divinely sanctioned, but actually divine in his own person. This wasn't simply megalomania. It was a carefully crafted solution to the problem of political unity that had plagued the Khmer lands since Chenla's fragmentation. By proclaiming himself the incarnation of Shiva on earth, Jayavarman II created a religious imperative for political unity. To oppose the king was not merely treason, but sacrilege. Local rulers could maintain their positions and dignity by accepting their place in a divine hierarchy with the Devaraja at its apex. This religious framework provided the ideological cement that would hold the Khmer Empire together through centuries of expansion and crisis. The choice of Phnom Kulen for this transformative ceremony was itself significant. Mountains held sacred significance in both Hindu cosmology and indigenous Khmer belief. By conducting the ritual on this holy mountain, Jayavarman II was symbolically recreating Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the center of the Hindu-Buddhist universe. He was not just founding a kingdom, but establishing a new cosmic order with himself at the center. Yet Jayavarman II was practical as well as visionary. After establishing his divine authority, he set about creating the administrative and military structures necessary to govern an empire. He established a new capital at Hariharalaya near the Tonle Sap, positioning himself to control both the rich agricultural lands and the vital trade routes. The location was strategic, close enough to the Great Lake to benefit from its resources, but elevated enough to avoid the worst flooding. The administrative system Jayavarman II created blended Indian concepts with Khmer traditions. Sanskrit became the language of administration and high culture, while Khmer remained the vernacular. He established a hierarchy of officials, from village chiefs to provincial governors, all ultimately answering to the divine king. Crucial to this system were the temples, which served not just as religious centers, but as administrative nodes, controlling land, labor, and resources in their districts. Perhaps most importantly, Jayavarman II began the systematic development of hydraulic infrastructure that would become the hallmark of Khmer civilization. Building on earlier traditions, his engineers began constructing the barrays, massive rectangular reservoirs, and the intricate canal systems that would allow the Khmer to master their environment. These waterworks served multiple purposes: storing water for the dry season, controlling floods during the monsoons, and creating the agricultural surplus necessary to support a complex civilization. The military reforms were equally significant. Jayavarman II created a standing army loyal to the crown rather than relying solely on levies from provincial nobles. The core of this force consisted of elephant cavalry, giving the Khmer a decisive advantage in the jungle warfare of Southeast Asia. He also established a navy to patrol the rivers and lakes, ensuring control of the waterways that were the highways of ancient Southeast Asia. By the time of his death, around 835 CE, Jayavarman II had transformed the fragmented Khmer lands into a unified empire. He had created not just a political entity, but a civilization with its own distinctive character. The synthesis of Indian and indigenous elements under the overarching framework of the Devaraja cult produced something unique: a Southeast Asian empire that could stand as equal to any power in Asia. His successors would build upon this foundation, literally and figuratively. The modest temples of Jayavarman II's reign would evolve into the architectural marvels of Angkor. The hydraulic systems he initiated would expand into a network that supported one of the ancient world's largest cities. The concept of divine kingship he established would inspire centuries of monumental construction as each king sought to demonstrate his divine nature through ever more ambitious projects. Yet perhaps Jayavarman II's greatest achievement was creating an idea of empire that could survive the death of its founder. The Khmer Empire would endure conquests, rebellions, and weak rulers because at its heart lay a compelling vision of cosmic order reflected in earthly governance. The king was not merely a political leader, but the linchpin holding together the natural, human, and divine worlds. This ideological foundation would prove remarkably resilient, sustaining Khmer civilization through its greatest triumphs and darkest hours. As the 9th century dawned, the Khmer Empire stood poised for expansion. The foundations were solid, the ideology compelling, and the resources abundant. What Jayavarman II had begun, his successors would elevate to heights he could scarcely have imagined. The death of an empire's founder often heralds chaos and fragmentation. Yet the Khmer Empire defied this historical pattern. The decades following Jayavarman II's passing witnessed not decline but steady consolidation and growth. His immediate successors, Jayavarman III, Indravarman II, and Yasovarman II, each contributed crucial elements that would transform their founder's vision into an enduring reality. This was the age when the Khmer Empire evolved from a regional power into the dominant force of Southeast Asia. Jayavarman III, who ruled from approximately 835 to 877 CE, faced the delicate task of every founder's heir, maintaining legitimacy while stepping out from a giant's shadow. His long reign, spanning over 4 decades, suggests remarkable political skill. Though he left few monuments compared to his successors, Jayavarman III's true achievement lay in peaceful consolidation. He strengthened the administrative apparatus his father had created, turning rough frameworks into functioning institutions. The network of temples expanded during his reign, creating nodes of royal authority throughout the realm. Most significantly, Jayavarman III maintained the sacred nature of kingship without the charismatic authority of his father. He proved that the Devaraja cult could survive its creator, that divine kingship could be transferred and inherited. This peaceful succession established a precedent that would serve the empire well. The divinity resided in the office as much as the man, allowing for continuity even when individual rulers proved weak or short-lived. The reign of Indravarman IV, beginning in 877 CE, marked a new phase of Khmer ambition. If Jayavarman II was the founder and Jayavarman III the consolidator, Indravarman I was the builder. His construction projects established patterns that would define Khmer civilization for centuries. He was the first to undertake what would become a royal tradition, the construction of a massive reservoir, Baray, a state temple, and an ancestral temple complex. The Indratataka Baray, completed in 877, was a rectangular reservoir measuring 3.8 kilometers by 750 meters. This massive undertaking required mobilizing thousands of workers and demonstrated the state's growing capacity for large-scale organization. But the Baray was more than an engineering feat. It was a cosmological statement. In Hindu-Buddhist thought, the cosmic ocean surrounded Mount Meru. By creating this artificial sea, Indravarman, I was literally recreating the universe in microcosm, with his temple mountain at the center. The Bakong Temple, consecrated in 881, represented another leap forward. As the first Khmer pyramid temple built entirely of stone, it established the architectural vocabulary that would culminate in Angkor Wat. The 5-tiered pyramid represented Mount Meru, while the surrounding moat symbolized the cosmic ocean. Every element held religious significance while serving practical functions. The moat provided water and defense, while the temple stored grain and treasures. Indravarman I also instituted the practice of building temples dedicated to his ancestors, transforming them into divine beings worthy of worship. This brilliant innovation linked the living king to a divine lineage, strengthening his legitimacy while incorporating ancestor worship traditions that resonated with ordinary Khmer. The Prayako Temple, dedicated to his predecessors, established a model followed by subsequent rulers. But it was Yasovarman I, ascending the throne in 889 CE, who would make the decision that shaped Khmer history forever: the move to Angkor. His father, Indravarman IV, had ruled from Hariharalaya, but Yasovarman envisioned something grander: The site he chose, roughly 20 kilometers northwest, offered strategic advantages. Closer to stone quarries, better positioned for expansion, and blessed with ideal conditions for hydraulic engineering. The new capital, called Yasodharapura, centered on the temple mountain of Phnom Bakheng. Built atop a natural hill, this temple commanded views across the entire Angkor plain. Its design was a cosmological masterpiece, 108 towers surrounding the central sanctuary, representing the sacred number in Hindu-Buddhist numerology. From its summit, one could see the cardinal directions extending to the horizon, reinforcing the king's role as cosmic sovereign. Yasovarman Yi's most ambitious project was the East Barai, or Yasodharatataka, a reservoir measuring 7.5 by 1.8 kilometers. This massive undertaking, capable of holding 55 million cubic meters of water, transformed the agricultural potential of the region. Fed by diverted rivers and monsoon rains, the Barai allowed for multiple rice harvests annually, creating the economic foundation for urban concentration and monumental construction. The establishment of Angkor was more than a change of address. It represented a new conception of Khmer power. Previous capitals had been relatively modest affairs, but Yasodharapura was designed from the beginning as an imperial center. The geometric precision of its layout, the scale of its waterworks, and the ambition of its temples announced that the Khmer were no longer content with regional dominance. They were building for eternity. Yasovarman I's reign also saw significant territorial expansion. His armies pushed into the Korat Plateau of present-day Thailand, establishing Khmer control over crucial trade routes. Inscriptions from his reign appear across a vast area, from the Mekong Delta to the mountains of Laos. This expansion wasn't mere conquest. It involved establishing administrative centers, building temples, and extending the hydraulic infrastructure that was the signature of Khmer civilization. The religious landscape also grew more complex during this period. While maintaining the Shaivite traditions of the Devaraja cult, these early kings also patronized Buddhism and Vaishnavism. Yasovarman I built monasteries for various religious orders, demonstrating the inclusive nature of Khmer kingship. This religious pluralism would become a hallmark of the empire, allowing it to incorporate diverse populations and beliefs within its framework. By 900 CE, as Yasovarman I's reign drew to a close, the transformation was complete. What had been a collection of chiefdoms a century earlier was now an empire with its own distinctive character. The elements that would define classical Khmer civilization were all in place: divine kingship expressed through monumental architecture, mastery of water through hydraulic engineering, administrative sophistication blending Indian concepts with local traditions, and religious syncretism that could embrace diversity while maintaining unity. The stage was set for the classical age of Angkor. The foundations laid by these early rulers, political, religious, technological, and architectural, would support centuries of achievement. Their vision of empire as cosmos, of king as god, of water as wealth, created a civilization unique in human history. The modest temples of this era would inspire the magnificent structures to come, while the reservoirs they dug would nurture the largest pre-industrial city in the world. The 10th century dawned with the Khmer Empire poised at a crucial juncture. The foundations were solid, the capital established, and the ideology refined. Yet what followed was not the smooth ascension one might expect, but a period of dynastic struggles that would ultimately forge an even stronger empire. These trials by fire would produce rulers who elevated Khmer civilization to unprecedented heights, transforming Angkor from a promising capital into the wonder of Southeast Asia. The death of Yasovarman I, around 910 CE, triggered the first major succession crisis in Khmer history. His sons, Harshavarman I and Isanavarman II, ruled briefly and ineffectively, their reigns marked by internal strife and external pressures. For nearly 2 decades, the empire that Jayavarman II had founded seemed in danger of fragmenting. Provincial lords grew restless, Tributary states sensed weakness, and the great projects of previous reigns lay abandoned. It was into this chaos that Jayavarman IV emerged, seizing power around 928 CE. Yet rather than ruling from Angkor, he established a new capital at Khmer, 85 kilometers northeast. This move, which historians long interpreted as usurpation, may actually represent something more complex, an attempt to reinvigorate the empire by returning to its roots. Khmer lay in the heartland of ancient Chenla, and Jayavarman IV's constructions there suggest not rejection, but reinterpretation of Khmer traditions. The monuments at Khmer reveal astonishing ambition. The Prasat Thom pyramid, rising 35 meters in 7 tiers, exceeded anything previously built by the Khmer. Its radical design, abandoning the traditional square base for a more elongated form, suggests architectural experimentation on a grand scale. The numerous temples constructed during Jayavarman IV's brief reign display a dynamism in sculpture and decoration that would influence Khmer art for generations. Yet Khmer's isolation ultimately proved its undoing. When Rajendravarman II claimed the throne in 944 CE, one of his first acts was returning the capital to Angkor. This decision reflected practical realities: Angkor's superior water resources, established infrastructure, and symbolic significance made it the natural center of empire. But Rajendravarman brought back more than just the seat of government. The artistic innovations of Khmer, the renewed vigor in construction, and perhaps most importantly, a determination to surpass all predecessors, returned with him. Rajendravarman II's reign marked the true beginning of Angkor's classical age. His state temple, Pre-Rup, completed in 961 CE, established new standards for architectural sophistication. Built of laterite and brick with sandstone decorative elements, Pre-Rup's 5 towers arranged in a quincunx pattern became the template for Khmer temple design. The precision of its construction, the elegance of its proportions, and the intricacy of its decorative program announced that Khmer architecture had reached full maturity. But Rajendravarman's greatest contribution may have been administrative rather than architectural. He reorganized the empire's governance, establishing a more centralized bureaucracy while respecting local traditions. His inscriptions reveal a sophisticated state apparatus with specialized departments for justice, taxation, public works, and religious affairs. The king positioned learned Brahmins as key advisors, creating an intellectual atmosphere that fostered advances in astronomy, mathematics, and literature. The East Mebon Temple, built on an artificial island in the East Barai, exemplified the integration of religious, political, and practical functions. Dedicated in 952 CE, it served simultaneously as a state temple, a center for distributing water to surrounding fields, and a visible symbol of royal power reflected in the sacred waters. The temple's elephant sculptures, carved from single blocks of sandstone, demonstrated the Khmer mastery of monumental art. It was during this period that the concept of the Temple Mountain reached its full theological and architectural development. Each major temple represented Mount Meru, the 5 peaks corresponding to the cosmic mountain's 5 summits. The surrounding moats symbolized the cosmic oceans, while the causeway crossing them represented the rainbow bridge linking the human and divine realms. Walking from the outer world through successive enclosures to the central sanctuary enacted a spiritual journey from the mundane to the sacred. The reign of Jayavarman IV, beginning in 968 CE, continued this classical efflorescence. His state temple, Takeo, marked another architectural milestone, the first Khmer temple built entirely of sandstone. This choice of material, though requiring far greater labor to quarry and transport, allowed for more precise carving and more durable construction. Takeo's austere grandeur, its surfaces left largely undecorated, creates an effect of monumental power that decorated temples rarely achieve. The intellectual climate of Jayavarman Ph's court rivaled its architectural achievements. The king himself was renowned for his learning, and his court attracted scholars from across the Buddhist and Hindu world. Sanskrit poetry flourished, astronomical observations refined the calendar, and legal codes grew more sophisticated. The inscription of Stok Kak Thom, though carved later, preserves traditions from this period that illuminate the complex religious and political ideologies underlying Khmer kingship. This classical period also witnessed the full development of Khmer hydraulic civilization. The Beret system expanded beyond mere reservoirs to become an integrated network of canals, spillways, and distribution channels. Sophisticated engineering allowed water to be directed precisely where needed, when needed. During the rainy season, excess water could be channeled away from fields and settlements. During dry months, stored water could be released gradually, ensuring continuous cultivation. The social structure that emerged reflected this hydraulic foundation. At the apex stood the Devaraja, the god king whose spiritual power ensured cosmic order and material prosperity. Below him, an elaborate hierarchy of officials, priests, and nobles administered the realm. The temples, controlling vast estates, employed thousands as dancers, musicians, cooks, gardeners, and craftsmen. Inscriptions record detailed work assignments. One temple required 439 dancers, 18 high priests, 2,740 other priests, 202 assistants, and 615 guards. Yet this was not merely exploitation. The temple-centered economy provided security, employment, and meaning for ordinary Khmer. Farmers knew their surplus supported magnificent constructions that ensured divine favor. Craftsmen took pride in contributing to monuments that would last forever. The hydraulic system that demanded their labor also protected them from drought and flood. This reciprocal relationship between rulers and ruled, mediated through religious institutions, created remarkable social stability. By the end of the 10th century, the Khmer Empire had achieved a synthesis of elements that would define its character for centuries to come. The architectural vocabulary was established, from the Temple Mountain's cosmic symbolism to the precise proportions that created harmony from massive stone. The religious framework successfully integrated diverse traditions under the umbrella of divine kingship. The hydraulic infrastructure had reached a level of sophistication that supported dense populations and monumental construction. Most importantly, a distinctly Khmer high culture had emerged, confident enough to borrow from others while maintaining its own identity. The stage was now set for even greater achievements. The 11th century would witness the empire's territorial expansion to its greatest extent and the creation of monuments that would dwarf even the ambitious constructions of the classical age. The 11th century opened with the Khmer Empire entering its most dynamic phase of expansion and cultural achievement. This was the era when Angkor's influence stretched from the South China Sea to the Andaman coast, when Khmer armies marched victorious across mainland Southeast Asia, and when the empire's confidence manifested in ever more ambitious architectural projects. Yet this golden age began not with triumph, but with crisis. A succession dispute that would paradoxically strengthen the empire by bringing to power one of its greatest rulers. The death of Jayavarman V in 1001 CE triggered a decade-long civil war that tested every institution the Khmer had built. Two rival claimants, Jayaviravarman and Suryavarman, fought for supremacy in a conflict that divided noble families and provincial governors. Temples were burned, populations displaced, and the careful administrative order of previous reigns collapsed into chaos. Yet from this crucible emerged a ruler who would expand Khmer power beyond all previous limits. Suryavarman Uy's victory in 1010 CE marked more than a change of dynasty. It inaugurated a new conception of Khmer imperial destiny. Unlike his predecessors who had been content with regional hegemony, Suryavarman I envisioned an empire spanning the entire Southeast Asian mainland. His background may explain this ambition. Claiming descent from the royal line of the Malaysian peninsula, he brought an outsider's perspective and connections throughout the maritime world. His first priority was internal consolidation, but Suryavarman II's methods differed radically from traditional approaches. Rather than simply demanding submission, he required all officials to swear a personal oath of loyalty. The inscription recording this oath, carved at the royal palace, preserves the names of thousands of functionaries who pledged their allegiance. This personalization of political bonds, combining traditional patron-client relationships with imperial administration, created a governing class personally invested in the king's success. With internal unity secured, Suryavarman IV launched campaigns that redrew the political map of Southeast Asia. His armies pushed westward into the Chao Phraya Valley of present-day Thailand, defeating the Mon kingdoms that had controlled this rich region. The conquest wasn't merely military. Khmer administrators, architects, and monks followed the armies, establishing the infrastructure of imperial rule. Temple inscriptions in Sanskrit and Khmer began appearing across the conquered territories, marking the spread of Angkorian civilization. The southern expansion proved equally dramatic. Suryavarman II's forces swept through the Mekong Delta, establishing Khmer control over the vital river routes to the sea. For the first time since the fall of Funan, a Cambodian power controlled both the inland agricultural heartland and the coastal trading ports. This combination of agricultural surplus and commercial wealth funded the empire's continued expansion and monumental construction projects. But Suryavarman V's most audacious achievement was the conquest of the northern territories. His armies ascended the Mekong Valley into present-day Laos, subduing the independent principalities that controlled the Middle River. The strategic importance of this conquest cannot be overstated. It gave Angkor control over the entire Mekong mainstream, the great artery of Southeast Asian commerce and communication. The administrative challenges of governing this vast empire stimulated innovations in Khmer statecraft. Suryavarman: I created a dual system combining direct royal administration in core provinces with indirect rule through tributary kings in peripheral regions. Local rulers who submitted retained their titles and ceremonial functions while accepting Khmer residents who ensured loyalty and collected tribute. This flexible approach allowed the empire to expand rapidly without overextending its administrative capacity. The economic transformation under Suryavarman I matched the territorial expansion. Control of both inland production and maritime trade created unprecedented wealth. Chinese ceramics, Indian textiles, and Javanese spices flowed through Khmer ports, while the empire's agricultural surplus fed growing urban populations. The capital at Angkor swelled to perhaps 750,000 inhabitants, making it one of the world's largest cities. This concentration of population supported specialized crafts, monumental construction, and high culture on an unprecedented scale. Suryavarman IV's architectural legacy reflected this new imperial confidence. The Western Barai, completed during his reign, dwarfed all previous reservoirs. 8 kilometers long and 2.1 kilometers wide, it could hold 57 million cubic meters of water. This massive undertaking required mobilizing tens of thousands of workers and demonstrated the empire's ability to marshal resources on an unprecedented scale. The engineering precision required, maintaining consistent depth across such a vast area, showcased Khmer technical mastery. The religious landscape also evolved under Suryavarman III. While maintaining the traditional Shaivite state cult, he showed unusual favor to Buddhism, particularly the Mahayana tradition. This religious inclusivity served political purposes, appealing to Buddhist populations in conquered territories while maintaining Brahmanical support at home. The king's personal devotion appears genuine. Inscriptions describe his meditation practices and philosophical studies, but it also demonstrated the cosmopolitan character of the expanded empire. Following Suryavarman I's death in 1050, his successor Udayaditya Varman II faced the challenge of maintaining this vast realm. Rather than pursuing further expansion, he focused on consolidation and construction. His state temple, the Baphuon, represented the most ambitious architectural project yet attempted by the Khmer. Originally designed as a three-tiered pyramid 120 meters long and 100 meters wide, topped by a tower rising 50 meters above ground level, it pushed Khmer engineering to its limits. The Baphuon's construction revealed both the capabilities and constraints of Khmer technology. The massive structure required innovative techniques to prevent collapse. Interior galleries and chambers distributed weight, while sand-filled cells provided stability. Yet even during construction, structural problems emerged. The builders' ambition had outpaced their technical solutions, requiring constant modifications and reinforcements. This tension between vision and capability would increasingly characterize Khmer monumental architecture. Udayaditya Varman II also constructed the Western Mabon, a temple on an artificial island in the western Barai. This structure perfected the integration of hydraulic and religious functions. Bronze pipes channeled water from the temple to surrounding fields, while ritual ceremonies ensured divine blessing for the agricultural cycle. The temple's famous bronze statue of Vishnu reclining on the cosmic serpent, over 6 meters long and cast in sections, demonstrated the sophistication of Khmer metallurgy. Yet beneath the magnificent facades, tensions were building. The constant demands for labor to build monuments and maintain waterworks strained the agricultural population. Conquered territories required garrisons and administrators, drawing resources from the center. The very success of expansion created vulnerabilities. Long frontiers difficult to defend, diverse populations challenging to integrate, and tributary rulers always seeking opportunities for independence. By the century's end, the Khmer Empire stood at its territorial maximum, stretching from the seas of Vietnam to the mountains of Burma. Its monuments reached skyward with unprecedented ambition, while its waterworks demonstrated mastery over nature itself. The synthesis of Indian concepts and Southeast Asian traditions had produced a distinctive civilization confident in its superiority. Yet the seeds of future challenges were already sown, in the structural problems of the Baphuon, in the restiveness of conquered peoples, and in the growing burden of maintaining an empire that may have expanded beyond its natural limits. The early 12th century witnessed the Khmer Empire reach its absolute pinnacle of power and artistic achievement. No single monument in human history better embodies a civilization's aspirations than Angkor Wat, and no ruler exemplified divine kingship more completely than its builder, Surya Varman II. Yet this supreme achievement emerged from another period of crisis, demonstrating how the Khmer repeatedly transformed challenges into catalysts for greatness. The death of Udayaditya Varman II in 1066 had ushered in decades of instability. His brother and successor, Harshavarman III, ruled a fracturing realm where provincial strongmen challenged royal authority and tributary states sensed weakness. The careful balance between center and periphery, established during the Great Expansion, began unraveling. When Surya Varman II seized power in 1113, he inherited an empire that retained its vast extent but had lost much of its cohesion. The new king's origins remain mysterious. Inscriptions suggest he came from a provincial noble family, rather than the direct royal line. This outsider status may explain both his driving ambition and his innovative approaches to kingship. Where established rulers might have been constrained by tradition, Surya Varman II felt free to reimagine the very nature of Khmer monarchy. His reign would transform not just the physical landscape of Angkor, but the spiritual and cultural foundations of the empire. Surya Varman II's first decade focused on military campaigns that restored and even expanded Khmer power. His armies marched against Champa in the east, pursuing a conflict that would consume enormous resources but demonstrate Khmer military might. In the west, he intervened in the politics of the Mon kingdoms, installing friendly rulers and extracting tribute. To the north, punitive expeditions reminded Lao principalities of their subordinate status. These campaigns served notice that the new king intended not merely to maintain, but to enhance imperial glory. Yet military conquest was merely the prelude to Suryavarman II's grand design. Around 1120, work began on what would become the supreme masterpiece of Khmer architecture, Angkor Wat. The temple's dedication to Vishnu rather than Shiva marked a significant religious shift, but more revolutionary was its scale and perfection. Where previous temple mountains had grown organically, with additions and modifications over time, Angkor Wat was conceived as a unified whole, every element planned from the beginning. The statistics alone stagger the imagination. The outer enclosure measures 1,025 by 802 meters, surrounded by a moat 190 meters wide. The central temple complex rises through 3 levels to towers 65 meters above ground. Construction required approximately 5 million tons of sandstone, each block quarried 40 kilometers away and transported by canal and elephant. The workforce numbered in the tens of thousands. Quarrymen, transporters, masons, sculptors, and the vast support staff needed to feed and house them. But Angkor Wat transcends mere size. Its perfection lies in proportion, in the mathematical precision that creates harmony from massive stone. The dimensions encode astronomical observations. The circumference of the central tower equals the number of days in a solar year. Gallery lengths correspond to the 4 cosmic ages of Hindu cosmology. This was architecture as cosmology, stone shaped into a model of the universe itself. The decorative program of Angkor Wat reveals the sophistication of Khmer visual culture. 8 kilometers of bas-relief carvings line the galleries, depicting Hindu epics, historical events, and cosmic mythology with unprecedented detail and dynamism. The famous Churning of the Ocean of Milk panel, 49 meters long, shows 88 demons and 92 gods in a composition of extraordinary complexity and power. Individual figures display personality and emotion while contributing to an overall design of perfect balance. The technical innovations required for Angkor Wat pushed Khmer engineering to new heights. The problem of spanning wide spaces without true arches led to the development of corbelled vaulting techniques that created soaring galleries. The drainage system, invisible but essential, channeled monsoon rains without damage to the structure. Most remarkably, the entire complex sits on a foundation of sand and laterite that has supported millions of tons for 9 centuries without significant settling. Suryavarman II intended Angkor Wat as his funerary temple, breaking with the tradition of eastern-facing entrances to open westward toward the realm of death. This orientation created spectacular visual effects, the afternoon sun illuminating the central towers, dawn light revealing the bas-reliefs in sequence. Every aspect served the central purpose of demonstrating the king's divinity and ensuring his posthumous apotheosis. The concentration of resources on Angkor Wat catalyzed broader cultural achievements. The workshops training thousands of craftsmen became centers of artistic innovation. New techniques in stone carving allowed for deeper relief and more complex compositions. Bronze casting reached new levels of sophistication, producing ritual objects of extraordinary beauty. The demand for educated administrators and priests expanded literacy, while royal patronage supported advances in astronomy, mathematics, and literature. The inscriptions from Suryavarman II's reign reveal a cosmopolitan court where Sanskrit learning flourished alongside Khmer vernacular culture. Diplomatic missions arrived from China and India, while Khmer influence spread throughout Southeast Asia. The empire had become not just a political power, but a cultural beacon, its architectural and artistic styles copied from Burma to Java. Yet this cultural efflorescence masked growing structural problems. The resources devoted to Angkor Wat, perhaps 300,000 worker years of labor, strained the agricultural economy. Military campaigns, especially the protracted war with Champa, drained manpower and wealth. The shift from Shaivism to Vaishnavism, while demonstrating royal prerogative, created religious tensions. Most seriously, the focus on monumental construction may have diverted attention from maintaining the hydraulic infrastructure upon which everything depended. Suryavarman II's death around 1150, possibly during a campaign in Champa, left a mixed legacy. He had created the greatest architectural monument in Southeast Asian history and restored Khmer military prestige. The empire's cultural influence had never been greater, its artistic achievements never more refined. Yet he also left a realm exhausted by constant warfare and monumental construction, its institutions strained and its neighbors resentful. The immediate aftermath seemed to confirm these vulnerabilities. Succession disputes weakened central authority, while Cham forces, seeking revenge for years of Khmer aggression, launched devastating counterattacks. For the first time in centuries, foreign armies threatened the capital itself. The empire that had seemed invincible under Suryavarman II suddenly appeared fragile, its greatness perhaps more facade than foundation. But the Khmer had survived crises before, and the greatest warrior king in their history was about to emerge. The disasters of the late 12th century would provoke one final burst of imperial energy, producing monuments rivaling Angkor Wat and military victories that would echo through the centuries. The empire's ability to transform catastrophe into catalyst would be tested as never before. In 1177, catastrophe struck the heart of the Khmer Empire. Cham naval forces, ascending the Mekong and Tonle Sap rivers, achieved what no foreign army had accomplished in centuries. They captured and sacked Angkor itself. The great capital burned, its temples desecrated, its population scattered. King Tribhuvanaditya Varman, Suryavarman II's successor, died in the assault. For 4 years, a Cham puppet ruler occupied the throne of the Devaraja. The empire that had dominated Southeast Asia for 4 centuries seemed on the verge of extinction. From this darkest hour emerged perhaps the most remarkable figure in Khmer history. Jayavarman VII was already in his 50s when he claimed the throne in 1181, having spent decades in exile or obscurity. Later inscriptions suggest he had served as a prince during earlier reigns, but had withdrawn from court, possibly to escape succession disputes. When he finally acted, it was with the decisive force of a man who had spent years preparing for his moment. The liberation campaign demonstrated military genius combined with messianic fervor. Jayavarman VII didn't merely seek to expel the Cham. He intended to transform disaster into divine mandate. The inscriptions present him as a Buddhist savior, a bodhisattva who had postponed his own enlightenment to save his people. This religious framework transformed a war of revenge into a cosmic struggle between Dharma and chaos. The decisive battle, fought on the waters of Tonle Sap, entered legend. Jayavarman VII's forces, despite years of occupation and disorganization, destroyed the Cham fleet in a massive naval engagement. The victory was total. Cham power on the rivers was broken forever. Following up with characteristic energy, the new king pursued the invaders back to their homeland, launching campaigns that would eventually see Khmer armies occupy the Cham capital of Vijaya. But military victory was only the beginning of Jayavarman VII's revolutionary reign. Unlike his predecessors who had built to glorify themselves, he constructed to serve humanity. The shift from Hindu to Buddhist ideology, specifically Mahayana Buddhism, with its emphasis on compassion and salvation, fundamentally altered the relationship between king and people. Where previous rulers had been gods demanding worship, Jayavarman VII presented himself as a suffering servant, seeking to alleviate human misery. The building program that followed defied comprehension even by Angkor's standards. Within his roughly 30-year reign, Jayavarman VII constructed more temples and monuments than all his predecessors combined. The centerpiece was Angkor Thom, a new fortified capital built directly north of Angkor Wat. Its walls, 8 meters high and 12 kilometers in circumference, enclosed 9 square kilometers, large enough to hold a city of hundreds of thousands. The gates of Angkor Thom announced the new religious order. Each of the 5 entrances displayed the 4 faces of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, gazing serenely in the cardinal directions. The causeways leading to these gates featured an extraordinary sculptural program. 54 gods and 54 demons holding sacred nagas, recreating the churning of the ocean myth in stone. But where Angkor Wat had celebrated cosmic order, these sculptures suggested dynamic transformation. At Angkor Thom's center rose the Bayon, Jayavarman VII's state temple, and one of the most enigmatic monuments ever created. From a distance, it appears as a chaotic mass of stone. Approaching closer, the viewer discovers 54 towers, each bearing 4 faces, creating 216 enormous visages gazing across the landscape. These faces, serene, compassionate, all-seeing, may represent Avalokiteshvara, Jayavarman VII himself, or a fusion of both. The ambiguity was likely intentional, merging royal and divine identities in unprecedented ways. The Bayon's bas-reliefs marked another departure from tradition. Where Angkor Wat depicted mythological scenes and cosmic battles, the Bayon showed daily life: markets, cockfights, childbirth, fishing. Common people, previously invisible in royal art, suddenly appeared everywhere. These scenes weren't mere decoration, but theological statements. In Mahayana Buddhism, enlightenment comes through engagement with the world, not withdrawal from it. By depicting ordinary life on his state temple, Jayavarman VII proclaimed the sacred nature of human existence. Beyond the capital, the king's compassionate ideology manifested in practical infrastructure. The inscription of Se Phong records the construction of 102 hospitals across the empire, each staffed with doctors, nurses, and astrologers. The medical facilities served all regardless of rank, providing care that included surgical procedures, herbal treatments, and spiritual healing. This public health system, unprecedented in the ancient world, demonstrated Buddhism's emphasis on alleviating suffering. Equally impressive were the 121 rest houses built along major roads. These dharmashalas provided free shelter, food, and medical care for travelers. Spaced a day's journey apart, they created a network supporting commerce, pilgrimage, and administration. Each rest house included shrines where travelers could make offerings for safe journeys. The system transformed travel from dangerous ordeal to manageable undertaking, integrating the empire's far-flung territories. The Thom temple, dedicated to the king's mother as the perfection of wisdom, illustrated the scale of these religious foundations. Its inscription records a permanent staff of 79,365, including 18 high priests, 2,540 priests, 615 dancers, and thousands of support personnel. The temple controlled 3,140 villages and consumed annual supplies, including 38,000 tons of rice. Such institutions were economic engines as much as religious centers, redistributing wealth while providing employment and meaning. Yet this frenetic construction concealed growing problems. The speed of building led to inferior techniques. Laterite and brick replaced sandstone, decorations were left unfinished, structural integrity was compromised. The Bayon itself shows signs of hasty construction and design changes during building. The quantity of monuments overwhelmed quality control, creating maintenance burdens the empire could barely support. More fundamentally, Jayavarman VII's Buddhist revolution created religious tensions. The established Brahmanical priesthood, though not persecuted, saw their influence diminished. Hindu temples received less patronage, while Buddhist institutions proliferated. The syncretic tolerance that had characterized Khmer religion gave way to more exclusive Buddhist ideology. These religious shifts, combined with the exhaustion from constant construction, created social stresses that would emerge after the great king's death. When Jayavarman VII died around 1218, he left an empire transformed yet troubled. His military victories had restored Khmer prestige and even expanded its territories. His building program had created monuments matching Angkor Wat in ambition, if not perfection. His compassionate Buddhism had introduced new concepts of kingship and social responsibility. Yet he also left a realm exhausted by 3 decades of continuous mobilization, its resources strained and its religious unity fractured. The reign of Jayavarman VII represented both culmination and turning point. No subsequent ruler would match his energy or vision. The very scale of his achievements, military, architectural, and religious, may have exhausted the empire's capacity for renewal. The Khmer would continue for 2 more centuries, but never again with the confident dynamism that had characterized their greatest kings. The warrior who saved the empire may also have precipitated its eventual decline. The death of Jayavarman VII marked more than the passing of a great king. It signaled the end of an era. The 13th century would witness profound transformations in Khmer society as the empire struggled to digest the radical changes of the previous reign while confronting new challenges both internal and external. This period of transition, often overlooked between the glories of Angkor Wat and the drama of final collapse, holds crucial keys to understanding how the mightiest power in Southeast Asia began its slow descent. Jayavarman VII's immediate successor, possibly his son Indravarman II, ruled briefly and ineffectively. The exhausted empire needed respite, but internal tensions allowed no rest. The Buddhist revolution had created powerful constituencies, monasteries controlling vast estates, a new administrative class trained in Buddhist rather than Brahmanical traditions, and populations accustomed to royal compassion rather than divine distance. Against these stood the traditional Hindu establishment, temporarily eclipsed but not eliminated, waiting for opportunity to restore the old order. That opportunity came with Jayavarman VIII's accession around 1243. His reign would last over half a century, providing stability but also revealing the deep fractures within Khmer society. Jayavarman VIII initiated what historians term the Hindu Restoration, though this label oversimplifies a complex religious and political transformation. The new king didn't merely favor Hinduism, he actively suppressed the Buddhist institutions his predecessor had established. The iconoclasm that followed ranks among history's great cultural destructions. Buddhist images throughout the empire were systematically defaced or destroyed. At the Bayan itself, Buddhist sculptures were chiseled away or modified into Hindu deities. Thousands of Buddha statues were toppled, their heads severed, their features obliterated. This wasn't mindless vandalism, but calculated policy, aimed at erasing Jayavarman VII's religious revolution and restoring traditional concepts of divine kingship. Yet the restoration could never be complete. Buddhism had sunk roots too deep to be simply eradicated. While state patronage shifted back to Hindu temples, Buddhist practice continued at the village level. More significantly, Theravada Buddhism began spreading from the West, brought by Mon missionaries and Thai migrants. This more austere form of Buddhism, emphasizing personal enlightenment over royal salvation, would eventually conquer the Khmer spirit even as Hindu kings ruled their bodies. The economic consequences of religious conflict compounded existing strains. The vast temple establishments created by Jayavarman VII required continuous support even as royal patronage shifted elsewhere. Villages found themselves supporting both Buddhist monasteries and Hindu temples, doubling religious obligations. The hospital system, dependent on royal funding, began deteriorating. Rest houses fell into disrepair as resources were redirected to new Hindu constructions. Jayavarman VIII did attempt monumental construction, but his projects revealed diminished capacities. The Mangalartha Temple, while substantial, lacked the innovative spirit of earlier monuments. Techniques continued the deterioration begun under Jayavarman VII, more brick, less sandstone, simpler decorative programs. The king's modifications to existing temples, particularly the conversion of Buddhist to Hindu imagery, consumed resources without creating lasting monuments. International circumstances added external pressures to internal problems. The rise of Thai kingdoms in the Chao Phraya Valley challenged Khmer hegemony in the West. These new powers, ethnically distinct and politically dynamic, represented a different model of Southeast Asian statecraft. Where the Khmer built elaborate temples and controlled through divine authority, the Thai created flexible confederations adapted to local conditions. The future belonged to their model, though this wasn't yet apparent. More ominously, the Mongol expansion under Kublai Khan created unprecedented regional upheaval. Though the Mongols never directly attacked Angkor, their invasions of Burma and Vietnam in the 1280s sent shockwaves throughout Southeast Asia. Refugee populations fled south, disrupting established patterns. Trade routes shifted to avoid conflict zones. Most significantly, the threat of Mongol invasion forced Southeast Asian powers to reconsider military organization and diplomatic alignments. Jayavarman VIII's response to the Mongol threat demonstrated both wisdom and the empire's diminished status. When Mongol envoys arrived demanding submission, the king chose diplomacy over defiance. Tribute was sent to Beijing, acknowledging at least nominal Mongol suzerainty. This pragmatic decision avoided invasion, but marked a psychological shift. The Khmer Empire, accustomed to receiving tribute, now paid it to foreign powers. Environmental factors, long masked by human ingenuity, began asserting themselves. The hydraulic system that had sustained Angkor for centuries showed signs of strain. Siltation clogged canals, reducing their capacity. The constant construction had deforested surrounding hills, increasing erosion and flood unpredictability. Climate studies suggest this period experienced increased variability in monsoon patterns, stressing a system designed for regular seasonal rhythms. The inscriptions from this period, fewer and less elaborate than before, hint at administrative breakdown. The detailed work assignments and resource allocations characteristic of earlier reigns gave way to formulaic repetitions. Provincial temples stopped producing inscriptions altogether, suggesting either declining literacy or reduced central control. The elaborate bureaucracy created by generations of kings began simplifying, perhaps collapsing, into more basic forms. Popular religion evolved in ways the court couldn't control. Village Buddhism, influenced by Theravada teachings, emphasized merit-making through personal action rather than royal construction. Small wooden temples replaced grand stone monuments. Local spirits, never entirely displaced by Indian religions, reasserted themselves. The religious synthesis that had characterized classical Angkor fragmented into multiple traditions, each claiming adherence, but none commanding universal allegiance. By Jayavarman VIII's death around 1295, the Khmer Empire retained its territorial extent, but had lost much of its internal cohesion. The capital still functioned, taxes were still collected, and armies still marched when summoned. But the dynamic energy that had built Angkor Wat and the Bayon had dissipated. Innovation gave way to conservation, expansion to defense, confidence to anxiety. The succession of Srindravarman, Jayavarman VIII's son-in-law, marked another religious shift. The new king, whether from conviction or political calculation, embraced Theravada Buddhism. This wasn't the state-centered Mahayana Buddhism of Jayavarman VII, but the more democratic southern tradition. Royal patronage shifted again, but now toward modest temples and meditation centers rather than cosmic monuments. The 13th century had transformed the Khmer Empire in fundamental ways. The religious unity that had supported divine kingship fragmented into competing traditions. The economic surplus that funded monumental construction dissipated through overextension and mismanagement. The administrative systems that had integrated diverse territories simplified or collapsed. Most critically, the confidence that had driven expansion and innovation gave way to defensive conservation. Yet the empire endured, held together by institutional inertia and cultural tradition. The 14th century would bring new challenges: environmental crisis, foreign invasion, and economic transformation. But the seeds of eventual collapse were already sown in the religious conflicts, economic strains, and administrative failures of the 13th century. The Khmer Empire's golden age had definitively ended, though its final dissolution lay still in the future. The 14th century dawned with the Khmer Empire clinging to its traditional forms while the foundations of its greatness crumbled beneath. Where previous challenges had sparked renewal and innovation, the converging crises of this period overwhelmed the empire's diminished capacity for adaptation. Environmental degradation, economic transformation, and geopolitical realignment combined to create a perfect storm that would ultimately force the abandonment of Angkor itself. The reign of Srindravarman, ending around 1307, established patterns that would characterize the century. The king's embrace of Theravada Buddhism reflected broader social changes rather than driving them. Unlike the top-down religious revolutions of previous reigns, this transformation bubbled up from below. Mon monks wandering from the west found eager audiences among farmers tired of supporting elaborate temple establishments. The new Buddhism promised salvation through personal effort rather than royal construction, a message that resonated with populations exhausted by centuries of monumental building. The environmental crisis, building for generations, reached critical proportions during this period. The vast hydraulic system that had enabled Angkor's growth now became a liability. Centuries of irrigation had raised soil salinity to dangerous levels, reducing crop yields precisely when the empire needed maximum production. The elaborate canal networks, engineering marvels when properly maintained, became stagnant breeding grounds for disease when neglected. Malaria and other waterborne illnesses, always present, reached epidemic proportions. Deforestation accelerated the environmental deterioration. The construction of temples, palaces, and residential buildings had consumed enormous quantities of timber. More critically, the charcoal needs of a huge urban population had stripped surrounding hills of forest cover. Without trees to regulate water flow, monsoon rains caused devastating floods, while dry seasons brought more severe droughts. The predictable seasonal rhythm that Khmer engineers had harnessed became increasingly erratic. Climate research reveals another factor beyond human control. The 14th century experienced the onset of the Little Ice Age, bringing cooler temperatures and altered precipitation patterns across the globe. For the Khmer, dependent on precise monsoon timing, even small changes proved catastrophic. Droughts in the 1340s and 1360s, more severe than any in recorded history, struck at agricultural production. The Great Berets, designed for normal variation, couldn't compensate for these extreme conditions. Economic transformation compounded environmental stress. The rise of maritime trade routes reduced the importance of overland commerce through Angkor. Chinese merchants, once dependent on Khmer-controlled rivers, now sailed directly to new ports on the coast. The Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya, founded in 1351, positioned itself perfectly to capture this seaborne wealth. Located near the mouth of the Chao Phraya River, Ayutthaya combined agricultural richness with maritime access, advantages Angkor couldn't match. The shift from monument construction to trade fundamentally altered social structures. The temple-based economy that had sustained Angkor required massive coordinated labor, but provided employment and meaning for hundreds of thousands. The new commercial economy rewarded individual enterprise and mobility. Skilled craftsmen, instead of working on eternal monuments, produced goods for export. Farmers, rather than contributing corvée labor, sold produce to merchants. The collective effort that built Angkor Wat gave way to individual pursuit of profit. Military challenges accelerated the empire's decline. The Thai kingdoms, particularly Ayutthaya, possessed advantages the Khmer couldn't counter. Their armies, organized around personal loyalty rather than divine obligation, proved more flexible and motivated. Thai warfare emphasized mobility and guerrilla tactics suited to Southeast Asian terrain, contrasting with Khmer preferences for formal battles and siege warfare. Most critically, the Thai had adopted gunpowder weapons from China, giving them decisive technological superiority. The first Ayutthayan invasion of Angkor, traditionally dated to 1369, demonstrated Khmer vulnerability. Though details remain disputed, Thai forces apparently captured the capital briefly before withdrawing. The psychological impact exceeded the physical damage. Angkor, inviolate since the Cham invasion 2 centuries earlier, had fallen again to foreign enemies. The divine protection that justified royal authority seemed to have failed. Jayavarman Namda's response to this crisis revealed the empire's exhaustion. Instead of mobilizing for revenge as Jayavarman VII had done, the king apparently accepted the new reality. Inscriptions from this period, increasingly rare, focus on religious donations rather than military victories. The last Sanskrit inscription at Angkor, dated 1327, marks the end of a literary tradition stretching back 6 centuries. After this, only a few Pali Buddhist texts appear, reflecting the complete transformation of Khmer high culture. The social revolution accompanying political decline transformed daily life. The rigid hierarchy centered on the god-king gave way to more egalitarian Buddhist communities. Village headmen replaced appointed officials. Local temples, built of wood and serving immediate communities, supplanted the great stone monuments. Women, marginalized in Brahmanical tradition, found new roles in Buddhist practice. The elaborate court ceremonies that had structured time and meaning simplified or disappeared entirely. Archaeological evidence from this period paints a picture of gradual abandonment rather than sudden collapse. The great temples continued functioning, but with reduced staff and simplified rituals. Residential areas show signs of depopulation, with wooden structures not replaced after decay. The hydraulic infrastructure, requiring constant maintenance, deteriorated section by section. Canals silted up, embankments breached, and the sophisticated water management system devolved into disconnected local efforts. Chinese diplomat Zhou Daguan's account, written in 1296, provides a snapshot of Angkor in decline. Though still impressed by the capital's scale and wealth, he noted signs of decay. Wooden buildings dominated where stone once stood. The population seemed diminished from earlier descriptions. Most tellingly, he observed that many preferred to live outside the capital, suggesting the urban center no longer offered advantages worth its costs. By century's end, the transformation was complete. Though kings still ruled from Angkor and claimed the ancient titles, real power had shifted elsewhere. The Mekong Delta, once Angkor's appendage, developed independent trading networks. The northwestern provinces paid nominal allegiance while pursuing their own interests. Former tributary states ignored demands for payment. The empire existed more in memory than reality. The 14th century had witnessed not dramatic collapse, but slow dissolution. Environmental crisis, economic transformation, military defeat, and social revolution combined to undermine every pillar supporting Khmer civilization. The responses: religious change, political decentralization, economic reorientation, were rational adaptations to new circumstances. But they led away from the monumental culture that had defined Angkor's greatness. As the 15th century approached, the question was no longer whether the Khmer Empire would survive, but whether Angkor itself could endure. The answer, already apparent to many, would transform one of history's greatest cities into its most magnificent ruin. The 15th century opened with Angkor still nominally the capital of the Khmer Empire. But reality had long diverged from pretense. The great city that once housed nearly 1 million souls had shrunk to perhaps a tenth of that number. Where magnificent palaces once stood, squatters occupied ruins. The vast temple complexes, built for eternity, sheltered diminished communities of monks who could barely maintain basic rituals. The end, when it came, would be less catastrophic collapse than quiet abandonment, a civilization walking away from its greatest creation. King Ponhea Yat, ascending the throne around 1405, inherited a kingdom that bore little resemblance to the empire of Jayavarman VII. The territorial losses were staggering. Ayutthaya controlled former Khmer provinces in the Chao Phraya Valley. Lanzang, a new Lao kingdom, dominated the middle Mekong. The Cham, once Angkor's victims, raided the eastern provinces with impunity. Only the core territory around Angkor and the increasingly autonomous Mekong Delta remained under direct control. Yet Ponhea Yat's reign marked a crucial transition. Recognizing that Angkor's location no longer served strategic purposes, he began shifting administrative functions southward. The commercial wealth now flowed through coastal ports, not overland routes. The defensive position that had protected Angkor for centuries became a liability when enemies possessed superior mobility. Most critically, the environmental degradation around the old capital made large population concentrations impossible. The second Ayutthayan invasion of 1431 traditionally marks Angkor's fall, but contemporary evidence suggests a more complex reality. The Thai forces, led by King Boromaracha II, did capture and loot the city. The royal regalia, symbol of legitimate rule, fell into enemy hands. Thousands of craftsmen, dancers, and priests were carried to Ayutthaya, transplanting Khmer high culture to the conquering kingdom. Yet this wasn't the first time Angkor had fallen, and previous defeats had sparked remarkable recoveries. This time proved different. When Ponhea Yat returned to Angkor after the Thai withdrawal, he found a city beyond recovery. The hydraulic infrastructure, damaged by warfare and neglect, couldn't be restored without massive investment. The population, already diminished, had fled and showed no inclination to return. The surrounding agricultural lands, exhausted by centuries of intensive cultivation, could no longer support urban concentration. Most decisively, the king himself chose not to rebuild, but to relocate. The move to the Quatre Bras region, where the Mekong and Tonle Sap rivers converge, represented strategic adaptation rather than defeat. This area, site of modern Phnom Penh, offered advantages Angkor had lost. River confluence provided transportation in all directions. Proximity to the sea facilitated maritime trade. The alluvial soils, annually renewed by flooding, remained fertile without elaborate irrigation. The location also placed the crown closer to the economically vital delta regions. Yet the abandonment of Angkor meant more than changing address. The entire ideological framework of Khmer kingship, built around the cosmic capital and its temple mountains, lost coherence. Without Angkor's sacred geography, the elaborate ceremonies linking king, cosmos, and kingdom became meaningless. The new Buddhism, emphasizing personal enlightenment over royal divinity, filled this ideological vacuum but couldn't replicate the unifying power of the old beliefs. The physical process of abandonment stretched over decades. Elite families departed first, following the court southward. Craftsmen and merchants, dependent on elite patronage, soon followed. Farmers lingered longer, but as irrigation systems failed and security deteriorated, they too drifted away. By mid-century, only Buddhist monks and the desperately poor remained among the ruins. The jungle, held at bay for centuries, began its patient reconquest. Portuguese missionary accounts from the 1550s describe discovering vast ruins in the jungle, already so overgrown that their origins seemed mysterious. The speed of nature's reclamation was remarkable. Strangler figs split stone galleries, silk cotton trees erupted through palace floors. The great moats became swamps teeming with crocodiles. Within a human lifetime, the greatest city in Southeast Asia had become an archaeological enigma. The Khmer state's transformation paralleled Angkor's abandonment. The elaborate bureaucracy simplified into basic forms recognizable to European visitors. The God King became a Buddhist monarch, first among equals rather than divine incarnation. Sanskrit gave way entirely to Pali and Khmer. The cosmic state shrank to a river kingdom competing with neighbors for commercial advantage rather than claiming universal dominion. Cultural continuity persisted despite political transformation. The royal chronicles, though written centuries later, preserved memory of Angkor's greatness. Court ceremonies, stripped of cosmic significance, maintained ancient forms. Classical dance, transplanted from stone reliefs to living performance, survived in attenuated form. The Khmer language, enriched by centuries of Sanskrit borrowing, remained the vehicle of identity even as the empire dissolved. The new capital at Lovek, established in the early 16th century, symbolized the transformed kingdom. Built for defense rather than cosmic representation, it featured earthen ramparts instead of stone galleries. The royal palace, constructed of wood, could be rebuilt quickly after the frequent fires. Temples remained important, but served communities rather than manifesting royal divinity. The entire conception reflected practical adaptation to reduced circumstances. Economic life reorganized around maritime commerce. Khmer merchants, freed from royal monopolies, traded throughout Southeast Asia. Products shifted from monumental construction materials to forest goods, resins, aromatic woods, animal products, easily gathered and transported. Chinese merchants established permanent communities, intermarrying with Khmer elites and creating hybrid commercial networks. The economy that had supported Angkor Wat couldn't sustain a fishing village, but new forms of wealth emerged. The intellectual transformation proved equally profound. The great libraries of palm leaf manuscripts, maintained by temples, deteriorated or burned. Sanskrit learning vanished, except among small circles of court Brahmins. Historical consciousness shifted from cyclical cosmic time to linear Buddhist chronology. The Khmer began seeing themselves not as the center of the universe, but as one nation among many, struggling for survival in a dangerous world. By 1500, the transformation was complete. The Khmer Empire that had dominated Southeast Asia for 6 centuries existed only in memory and ruins. In its place stood a modest kingdom, Buddhist rather than Hindu, commercial rather than monumental, adaptive rather than assertive. The continuities, language, dance, royal lineage, masked fundamental discontinuity. The civilization that built Angkor had ended, replaced by something smaller but perhaps more sustainable. The abandonment of Angkor stands as one of history's great urban failures, yet also as testimony to human adaptability. Faced with environmental degradation, economic transformation, military defeat, and ideological crisis, the Khmer chose survival over glory. They walked away from their greatest creation to build something new. In doing so, they preserved their identity, even while transforming their civilization. Angkor died so the Khmer could live. The 16th century found the Khmer kingdom radically transformed from its imperial past. The cosmic empire centered on Angkor had given way to what historians call the Middle Period, a series of riverine capitals that reflected new realities of power, commerce, and survival. Yet this transformation, often portrayed as simple decline, actually demonstrated remarkable resilience. The Khmer reinvented their civilization to meet changing circumstances, preserving cultural identity while adapting political and economic structures. The establishment of Lovek as the capital around 1528 under King Angkor I marked the beginning of sustained recovery. Unlike Angkor's cosmic pretensions, Lovek was positioned for practical advantages. Located on the Tonle Sap River north of the Quatre Bras, it controlled vital water routes while remaining defensible against Thai and Vietnamese incursions. The site's elevation protected against flooding, while surrounding forests provided building materials and trade goods without extensive transportation. Ang Chan I proved an effective ruler within reduced circumstances. His reign saw the construction of new Buddhist temples, though built of wood and brick rather than sandstone. The king patronized arts and letters, commissioning translations of Buddhist texts and supporting court dancers who maintained classical traditions. Most significantly, he established diplomatic relations with European powers, recognizing that survival required engaging with global forces reshaping Southeast Asia. The arrival of Portuguese merchants and missionaries in the 1550s introduced new dynamics. These first Europeans found not the mighty empire of legend, but a modest kingdom struggling between aggressive neighbors. Yet they also discovered sophisticated court culture, thriving Buddhist institutions, and commercial networks spanning the region. Portuguese accounts describe Lovek as a substantial city of perhaps 50,000 inhabitants, far smaller than Angkor's Peak, but respectable by contemporary standards. Spanish and Portuguese mercenaries soon became factors in Khmer politics. King Barome Rayachea I, ruling from 1566 to 1576, employed European soldiers and weapons in campaigns against Ayutthaya. These early modern military technologies, arquebuses, small cannons, and European tactical knowledge temporarily offset Thai numerical superiority. The kingdom even experienced modest territorial expansion, recovering some provinces lost during Angkor's collapse. Yet European involvement proved double-edged. Missionaries demanded conversion privileges that threatened Buddhist institutions. Merchants sought monopolies, disrupting established trade patterns. Most dangerously, European mercenaries introduced destabilizing elements into succession disputes. The firearms that strengthened royal armies against external enemies also empowered rebellious princes and provincial governors. The fall of Lovek to Ayutthayan forces in 1594 demonstrated persistent Khmer vulnerability. King Naresuan of Ayutthaya, one of Southeast Asia's great military leaders, besieged the capital for months. When the city fell, thousands more Khmer intellectuals, artists, and craftsmen were deported to Ayutthaya. This brain drain, following similar deportations in 1431, further impoverished Khmer high culture while enriching their conquerors. The subsequent shift of the capital to Udong in 1618 reflected continuing adaptation. Located between the Tonle Sap and the Mekong, Udong maximized access to both river systems. The move also acknowledged changing geopolitical realities. Vietnamese expansion into the Mekong Delta created new pressures from the east, while Ayutthaya remained threatening from the west. Positioning between these powers required delicate diplomacy backed by defensive advantages. The 17th century witnessed the emergence of what scholars term the dual vassalage system. Khmer kings paid tribute to both Ayutthaya and the Vietnamese Nguyen lords, playing these powers against each other to maintain independence. This strategy, though demeaning to royal pride, proved remarkably effective. When Thai demands became excessive, the Khmer sought Vietnamese protection. When Vietnam pressed too hard, Thai alliance offered relief. King Che Chetha II's reign, 1618-1628, exemplified this diplomatic balancing. He married a Vietnamese princess, cementing alliance with the Nguyen lords. This connection facilitated Khmer settlement in the Mekong Delta region called Pre Nokor, later Saigon. Vietnamese military advisors modernized the Khmer army, while Vietnamese merchants expanded commercial networks. Yet the king simultaneously maintained ceremonial submission to Ayutthaya, preventing Thai military intervention. Cultural adaptation accompanied political maneuvering. The influence of Theravada Buddhism, already dominant, deepened through exchanges with Lankan and Thai monks. Royal patronage shifted from monument construction to manuscript production. Palm leaf texts, preserving historical chronicles, religious teachings, and classical literature multiplied. The Khmer developed their own distinctive Buddhist traditions, blending orthodox Theravada with indigenous spirit beliefs and residual Hindu practices. The economy evolved to meet new conditions. Without the agricultural surpluses that supported Angkor, the kingdom relied increasingly on forest products and trade. Cardamom, pepper, and other spices found ready markets. Elephant hunting provided ivory for Chinese merchants. River tolls on goods passing between the interior and the sea generated royal revenue. This extractive economy couldn't support monumental construction, but sustained a modest court and administrative apparatus. Social structures reflected economic changes. The rigid hierarchy of Angkor gave way to more fluid arrangements. Merchants, previously marginal, gained influence through wealth. Provincial governors exercised near autonomy, remitting tribute rather than accepting direct administration. Village communities, organized around Buddhist temples, largely governed themselves. Chinese immigrants, initially confined to commercial roles, began intermarrying with Khmer elites and entering administration. By the late 17th century, Vietnamese expansion fundamentally altered regional dynamics. The completion of Nam Tien, the Vietnamese southern advance, brought Vietnamese settlers to the Mekong Delta in large numbers. Pre Nocor became Saigon, a Vietnamese city. The Khmer lost access to the sea, becoming landlocked between Thai and Vietnamese powers. This geographical compression would define Cambodian history for centuries. The reign of King Ang Eng, 1779-1796, marked both nadir and transformation. Installed by Vietnamese forces after years of civil war, he ruled a kingdom reduced to central Cambodia. Yet his reign also saw cultural renaissance. The king patronized the compilation of the Rimkur, the Khmer version of the Ramayana. Court ceremonies, simplified but maintaining ancient forms, experienced revival. Buddhist scholarship flourished despite political constraints. The post-Angkor centuries revealed Khmer civilization's capacity for survival through adaptation. Stripped of imperial pretensions, squeezed between expanding powers, and transformed economically, the Khmer nonetheless maintained distinct identity. The great temples became forest-shrouded mysteries, but the culture that created them evolved rather than disappeared. Classical dance survived in village festivals. Ancient myths found new expression in Buddhist contexts. The language, enriched by Pali rather than Sanskrit, remained the vehicle of identity. This persistence, despite adversity, would prove crucial in coming centuries. French colonialism, 20th century genocide, and modern globalization would test Khmer resilience even more severely. Yet the adaptations of the post-Angkor period, political flexibility, cultural syncretism, and economic pragmatism, provided tools for survival. The empire was gone, but the civilization endured, awaiting rediscovery by a world that had forgotten Angkor's greatness. The 19th century brought transformations to Cambodia as profound as any since Angkor's abandonment. European colonialism, advancing across Southeast Asia, would paradoxically both threaten Khmer independence and restore Angkor to world consciousness. The French, seeking to justify their civilizing mission, would resurrect the ruins as proof of past greatness, while reducing the living kingdom to protectorate status. This bitter irony, colonial subjugation accompanied by cultural rediscovery, would define Cambodia's modern emergence. By 1800, the Khmer kingdom had reached its lowest ebb. King Ang Chan II ruled a rump state compressed between Thai and Vietnamese dominions. The western provinces paid tribute to Bangkok, the eastern to Hue. Even the core territory around Udong faced constant interference from both powers. When succession disputes arose, Thai and Vietnamese armies installed rival claimants, turning Cambodia into a battlefield for regional supremacy. The 1830s witnessed the nadir of Khmer independence. Vietnamese Emperor Minh Mang, determined to absorb Cambodia completely, implemented direct administration. Khmer officials were replaced by Vietnamese mandarins. The Khmer language was banned from official use. Buddhist monks faced pressure to adopt Vietnamese Mahayana practices. Even personal names and dress codes were regulated to enforce Vietnamese cultural norms. This systematic assault on Khmer identity provoked desperate resistance. The Great Rebellion of 1840-1841, led by Buddhist monks and provincial nobles, demonstrated that Khmer nationalism survived despite political fragmentation. Rebels invoked memories of Angkor, calling for restoration of ancient greatness. Though ultimately suppressed, the uprising forced Vietnamese withdrawal and Thai intervention. The resulting compromise, joint Thai-Vietnamese suzerainty, satisfied neither power while giving Cambodians breathing space to preserve their identity. Into this volatile situation came French imperialism. The establishment of French Cochinchina in 1862 introduced a new player seeking to dominate the Mekong region. French naval officers exploring upriver encountered a kingdom that seemed frozen in time. The contrast between contemporary poverty and legendary wealth, between political weakness and cultural richness, fascinated European observers. Here was justification for empire, a once great civilization requiring French protection and guidance. King Norodom, ascending the throne in 1860, recognized that traditional balancing between Thailand and Vietnam no longer sufficed. French power, backed by modern weapons and global resources, offered protection at the price of independence. The Treaty of 1863, establishing the French Protectorate, represented calculated survival strategy. Better to accept limited sovereignty under one power than dismemberment between two. Yet French protection came with unexpected consequences. Naval officer Dudar de la Grey's expedition up the Mekong in 1866 sought commercial routes to China, but discovered something far more significant: the ruins of Angkor. Though never truly lost to local populations, Angkor's existence had faded from international awareness. Dudar de la Grey's reports, published posthumously, electrified European audiences with descriptions of temples surpassing anything in India or Egypt. The true herald of Angkor's resurrection was Henri Mouhot, whose posthumously published journals brought vivid descriptions to wider audiences. Though often mistakenly credited as Angkor's discoverer, Mouhot understood he was revealing to Europeans what Cambodians had always known. His romantic prose, comparing Angkor Wat to Solomon's Temple and describing Ta Prohm's marriage of architecture and nature, captured imaginations worldwide. Suddenly, Cambodia possessed cultural treasures justifying international attention. The École Française d'Extrême Orient, established in 1900, institutionalized Angkor's study and restoration. French scholars like Georges Coedes deciphered inscriptions, revealing the empire's history. Architects like Henri Marchal began clearing vegetation and stabilizing structures. The Commission des Monuments Historiques mapped sites and established protective regulations. This scholarly attention, while advancing knowledge, also served colonial purposes, demonstrating French capacity to preserve what Cambodians allegedly could not. The Restoration philosophy reflected colonial attitudes. French experts, trained in European conservation principles, often imposed their vision over local traditions. Buddhist monks who had maintained shrines for centuries found themselves excluded. Living religious practice was discouraged in favor of archaeological purity. The temples, transformed into museums, lost their spiritual function while gaining international prestige. King Sisawat, Norodom's successor in 1904, navigated these cultural tensions carefully. He supported French archaeological work while maintaining royal ceremonies at Angkor. The king understood that international recognition of Khmer heritage strengthened Cambodia's distinct identity within French Indochina. While Vietnam and Laos lacked comparable monuments, Cambodia possessed proof of independent greatness predating colonial rule. The 1906 treaty returning the northwestern provinces from Thai control demonstrated Angkor's political value. French diplomats argued that territories containing Angkor historically belonged to Cambodia. The successful negotiation, returning Battambang and Siem Reap provinces, showed how cultural heritage could serve contemporary politics. Angkor became not just tourist attraction, but national symbol, justifying Cambodia's territorial integrity. Tourism developed rapidly following improved access. The Grand Hotel d'Angkor, opened in 1929, offered European standard accommodation near the ruins. Roads replaced jungle paths. Regular boat services connected Phnom Penh with Siem Reap. Wealthy Europeans and Americans included Angkor on Asian grand tours. Revenue from tourism, though benefiting primarily French businesses, also employed thousands of Cambodians as guides, guards, and service workers. The cultural impact proved double-edged. International recognition restored Cambodian pride in their heritage. Young intellectuals like Prince Sisowath Yuttavong studied inscriptions and chronicles, reconstructing national history. The Royal Ballet, performing in Paris during the 1906 colonial exhibition, demonstrated living connections to Angkor's celestial dancers. Yet this cultural renaissance occurred within colonial constraints that limited political expression. The Cambodian elite's response revealed growing nationalism. The Nagara Vada newspaper, founded in 1936, used Angkor's greatness to argue for independence. If ancient Khmers could build such monuments, why should modern Cambodians require French guidance? Buddhist Institute scholars collected manuscripts and oral traditions, preserving knowledge threatened by modernization. The Sangha, Buddhist monkhood, became centers of cultural resistance dressed in religious preservation. By World War II's eve, Angkor had been thoroughly transformed. From jungle-shrouded ruins known only to locals, the temples had become internationally celebrated monuments. Scientific excavation revealed the civilization's extent and sophistication. Conservation efforts, however flawed, ensured physical survival. Most significantly, Angkor had become the symbol of Cambodian national identity, proof that this small kingdom had once dominated Southeast Asia. Yet contradictions persisted. The French celebrated Angkor's builders while denying their descendants self-government. International scholars studied Khmer greatness while contemporary Cambodians remained colonial subjects. The temples, restored to physical grandeur, lost their living religious functions. These tensions would explode following independence, as Cambodians struggled to reclaim both political sovereignty and cultural authenticity. The colonial period's ambiguous legacy shaped all subsequent Cambodian history. French scholarship preserved knowledge that might otherwise have vanished. Colonial infrastructure made Angkor accessible to the world. Yet colonialism also froze Cambodia in artificial traditionalism, denying the natural evolution that might have organically connected past greatness with modern development. This paradox, preservation through subjugation, would haunt Cambodia's post-colonial efforts to balance heritage with progress. The Second World War shattered the colonial order that had seemed permanent just years before. For Cambodia, Japanese occupation from 1941 to 1945 demonstrated French vulnerability while awakening possibilities of Asian self-determination. The young King Norodom Sihanouk, installed by French authorities expecting a pliable puppet, would instead become the architect of Cambodian independence. His invocation of Angkor's legacy, transforming ancient glory into modern nationalism, would define the post-colonial era's achievements and contradictions. The Japanese occupation, though maintaining French administration initially, fundamentally altered Cambodian political consciousness. In March 1945, responding to Allied advances, Japan orchestrated nominal independence declarations across Indochina. King Sihanouk, just 22 years old, proclaimed Cambodia's freedom-invoking, the great Khmer Empire that once extended from the China Sea to the Indian Ocean. This rhetoric, linking contemporary sovereignty to Angkorian greatness, would become Sihanouk's signature approach. France's attempt to reimpose colonial control after Japan's defeat met transformed circumstances. The Khmer Isarak, Free Khmer movement, launched guerrilla resistance from Thai and Vietnamese sanctuaries. Though politically fragmented, ranging from Republican nationalists to communist revolutionaries, the movement shared invocations of Angkor. Propaganda materials featured Angkor Wat's silhouette. Rebel songs celebrated ancient victories over foreign invaders. The ruins, preserved by French scholars, became symbols of anti-French resistance. Sihanouk's genius lay in co-opting this nationalist sentiment while maintaining royal authority. His Royal Crusade for Independence, launched in 1952, brilliantly outmaneuvered both French colonizers and Republican rebels. Traveling internationally, the king presented Cambodia's case through cultural diplomacy. Dance troupes performed classical Khmer ballet. Photographic exhibitions displayed Angkor's monuments. The message was clear. A civilization capable of creating such wonders deserved sovereignty. Independence, achieved in November 1953, came through negotiation rather than revolution. Sihanouk's strategy, combining international pressure, limited cooperation with France, and domestic mobilization, preserved institutions while gaining freedom. The French, facing disaster in Vietnam, calculated that graceful withdrawal from Cambodia might salvage influence. The resulting independence maintained economic ties and cultural cooperation, while granting political sovereignty. The immediate post-independence period, which Sihanouk termed the Sangkum Reister Niyum, People's Socialist Community era, witnessed ambitious attempts to modernize while preserving tradition. Sihanouk, abdicating the throne to enter politics directly, promoted Buddhist socialism as a distinctly Cambodian development path. This ideology explicitly invoked Angkor's example: massive public works, social solidarity, and divine leadership, adapted to contemporary conditions. The construction program of the 1950s and 1960s consciously echoed Angkorian precedents. New Independence Monument in Phnom Penh, designed by Van Mole Van, reinterpreted classical Khmer architecture in modern materials. School buildings featured traditional roof lines executed in concrete. The Chaktamuk Conference Hall's soaring curves recalled ancient temples while accommodating contemporary functions. This architectural program proclaimed continuity with the past while embracing the future. Education policy similarly balanced heritage and progress. The curriculum emphasized Khmer history, particularly the Angkorian period, fostering national pride. Sanskrit and Pali studies expanded alongside French and English. The Buddhist university, established in 1954, trained monks in traditional learning while encouraging modern scholarship. Primary education, expanding rapidly, taught rural children about their glorious ancestors while preparing them for contemporary citizenship. Cultural production flourished under royal patronage. The royal ballet, elevated to national symbol, toured internationally, spreading Cambodia's soft power. Filmmakers like Norodom Sihanouk himself, who produced, directed, and starred in numerous films, created works celebrating Khmer identity. The novel Wilting Flower by Ngoc Thom explored tensions between tradition and modernity. This cultural renaissance, state-supported but genuinely creative, demonstrated post-colonial vitality. Yet contradictions emerged between democratic aspirations and traditional authority. Sihanouk's rule, though genuinely popular, brooked little opposition. Political parties found themselves marginalized by royal dominance. The Sangha, traditionally independent, faced state attempts at control. Most problematically, development remained urban-centered while rural populations, still 90% of Cambodians, saw limited improvement. The gap between Angkorian rhetoric and village reality widened dangerously. The Vietnam War's escalation fundamentally destabilized Sihanouk's balancing act. Cambodia's neutrality, maintained through diplomatic dexterity, became increasingly untenable as conflict engulfed Indochina. North Vietnamese use of Cambodian territory for the Ho Chi Minh Trail brought American bombing. The 1970 coup overthrowing Sihanouk, backed by pro-American generals, shattered the fragile post-colonial synthesis. The Khmer Republic, 1970-1975, under Lon Nol, represented radical rupture with Sihanoukist tradition. The new regime, seeking to distance itself from royalist predecessors, initially downplayed Angkorian heritage. Military necessity soon forced reconsideration. As civil war intensified, Angkor Wat appeared on currency and propaganda, rallying nationalist sentiment against Vietnamese communist forces. The ancient anti-Vietnamese campaigns were invoked to justify contemporary conflict. International archaeological work, disrupted by warfare, shifted focus from restoration to preservation. André Malraux, French culture minister and former Angkor visitor, organized UNESCO appeals for the monument's protection. The École Française d'Extrême-Orient evacuated its library and archives. Bernard-Philippe Grolier, the last French conservator, desperately documented sites before fleeing. These efforts, though limited, ensured knowledge survived even as political order collapsed. The rural insurgency that would become the Khmer Rouge initially showed little interest in Angkorian heritage. Their radical peasant communism rejected both feudal past and bourgeois present. Yet as victory approached, even these revolutionaries recognized Angkor's symbolic power. Propaganda began featuring ancient irrigation works as precedents for agricultural collectivization. The great temples, stripped of religious meaning, became symbols of collective labor's potential. By 1975, as the Khmer Republic collapsed, Cambodia faced its darkest hour. The post-colonial synthesis, modernization guided by tradition, development preserving identity, had failed catastrophically. Urban intellectuals who had celebrated Angkorian heritage fled or faced execution. Rural populations, in whose name the revolution claimed to act, would suffer even more. The temples themselves, having survived centuries of neglect, faced new threats from ideological extremism. The tragedy was that genuine achievements had occurred. Literacy had expanded dramatically, healthcare had improved, cultural pride had revived. Archaeological knowledge had advanced significantly, yet these gains proved fragile when political consensus shattered. The invocation of Angkor, which had unified anti-colonial resistance and early independence, became contested terrain between competing visions of Cambodia's future. The post-colonial period demonstrated both the power and limitations of cultural heritage in nation-building. Angkor's legacy inspired remarkable achievements in architecture, arts, and education. International recognition of Khmer civilization's greatness supported diplomatic independence, yet appeals to ancient glory couldn't resolve contemporary contradictions between tradition and change, hierarchy and equality, neutrality and alignment. These unresolved tensions would explode in the horror that followed. April 17, 1975 marked not liberation, but the beginning of Cambodia's descent into unimaginable horror. As Khmer Rouge forces entered Phnom Penh, citizens initially celebrated the end of civil war. Within hours, celebration turned to terror as black-clad soldiers began forcibly emptying the capital. The radical experiment that followed, attempting to transform Cambodia into an agrarian utopia by erasing its past, would claim nearly 2 million lives and bring Khmer civilization closer to extinction than any foreign invasion. The Communist Party of Kampuchea, commonly known as the Khmer Rouge, embodied contradictions that proved catastrophic. Led by Paris-educated intellectuals like Pol Pot, they preached radical peasant nationalism while destroying traditional rural society. Invoking Angkor's irrigation achievements, they forced millions into agricultural slavery. Claiming to restore Cambodian greatness, they systematically murdered bearers of Khmer culture. This perverse relationship with history, simultaneously invoking and erasing it, defined their devastating rule. The forced ruralization began immediately. Phnom Penh's population, swollen by refugees to over 2 million, was marched into the countryside at gunpoint. Hospitals were emptied, patients dying on the roadside. Schools, universities, libraries, all symbols of modern knowledge, were abandoned. The National Museum's staff fled, leaving millennia of artifacts unguarded. Within days, centuries of urban civilization ended as cities became ghost towns inhabited only by Khmer Rouge cadres. The new regime, calling itself Democratic Kampuchea, proclaimed Year Zero. History would begin anew. Pre-revolutionary life became the old society, its every trace targeted for elimination. Money was abolished, markets closed, books burned, family names carrying ancestral memory were replaced by revolutionary aliases. Even language was sanitized, with traditional honorifics and Buddhist terminology banned. This assault on memory aimed to create blank slates for revolutionary transformation. The attack on Buddhism struck at Khmer identity's core. Monks, revered for millennia, were defrocked and forced into labor brigades. Many were executed as parasites. Pagodas became storehouses or prisons. Sacred texts fueled cooking fires. Buddha statues were smashed or thrown into rivers. The Sangha, which had preserved Khmer culture through centuries of foreign domination, faced complete annihilation. Of 60,000 monks in 1975, fewer than 3,000 survived. Angkor itself faced contradictory treatment. Initially, the temples were simply ignored, their remoteness providing protection. Some Khmer Rouge units, composed of illiterate peasants, showed traditional respect for the ancient sites. But as the regime radicalized, Angkor became problematic. The monuments represented feudal oppression, religious superstition, and foreign influence, everything the revolution opposed. Yet their international fame and tourist potential offered future resources. The compromise revealed the regime's schizophrenia. Angkor Wat appeared on Democratic Kampuchea's flag, but stripped of religious meaning. Official propaganda praised ancient hydraulic engineering while condemning the oppressive god kings who built it. Chinese advisors, the regime's only allies, were occasionally brought to view the temples, presented as achievements of collective labor rather than royal patronage. This cognitive dissonance, celebrating Angkor's achievements while reviling its creators, epitomized the regime's incoherence. Conservation ceased entirely. The École Française d'Extrême Orient's facilities were ransacked. The conservation d'Angkor workshops, training craftsmen for generations, closed forever. Nature resumed its patient assault on the monuments. More dangerously, soldiers quartered in temple complexes caused inadvertent damage. Cooking fires blackened ancient stones. Military vehicles crushed buried foundations. Revolutionary slogans were sometimes carved into bas-reliefs. The human catastrophe dwarfed architectural damage. Execution sites across Cambodia swallowed perceived enemies of the revolution. The infamous S-21 prison in Phnom Penh processed thousands for torture and death. Base people, rural Cambodians deemed politically reliable, wielded life-and-death power over new people from the cities. Starvation claimed more victims than execution as agricultural fantasies met reality. The irrigation projects invoking Angkorian precedent proved disastrous failures that flooded some areas while leaving others parched. Intellectuals faced particular targeting. Speaking foreign languages, wearing glasses, or possessing soft hands marked victims for elimination. Teachers, doctors, engineers, anyone with education were murdered as enemies of peasant revolution. Traditional artists, musicians, and dancers were executed as feudal remnants. The royal ballet, which had preserved classical dance for centuries, was virtually exterminated. Master craftsmen who understood traditional architecture were killed or died from overwork. The regime's paranoia intensified over time. Pol Pot, convinced of internal betrayal, unleashed purges that consumed even loyal revolutionaries. The Eastern Zone Massacre of 1978 killed hundreds of thousands of Khmer Rouge supporters suspected of Vietnamese sympathies. Children were encouraged to inform on parents. Spouses denounced each other. The social fabric, already strained, disintegrated completely into atomic terror. Vietnamese invasion in December 1978 ended the nightmare but began new controversies. The People's Republic of Kampuchea, installed by Vietnamese forces, faced the challenge of rebuilding from absolute devastation. Survivors emerged from forests and labor camps, traumatized and starving. Families were shattered. Everyone had lost relatives. Traditional knowledge systems were broken. An entire generation of educated Cambodians had been murdered. The immediate priority was simple survival. Rice fields needed planting. Basic administration required restoration. Cities had to be repopulated. But cultural recovery proved equally urgent. The new government, seeking legitimacy, immediately invoked Angkor. January 7, 1979, the day Phnom Penh fell to Vietnamese forces, was proclaimed a second Independence Day, liberating Cambodia from genocidal tyranny. Angkor Wat's image appeared on the new flag, restored to its traditional meaning. International response remained complicated by Cold War politics. The Khmer Rouge, despite their atrocities, retained Cambodia's UN seat with American and Chinese support. This diplomatic isolation limited assistance for reconstruction. UNESCO couldn't officially engage while Democratic Kampuchea maintained international recognition. Individual experts provided advice, but systematic conservation efforts remained impossible. At Angkor itself, damage assessment revealed mixed results. The temple's stone cores had survived, testament to ancient engineering. But wooden structures had vanished. Metal artifacts were looted. Statuary showed damage from neglect rather than deliberate destruction. Most critically, the human infrastructure, the craftsmen, scholars, and monks who understood the monuments, had been decimated. Knowledge transmitted orally for generations was lost forever. The psychological impact proved most lasting. Cambodians had been forced to destroy their own heritage, murder their own families, deny their own identities. The trauma created what researchers called cultural bereavement, grief for an entire civilization's near extinction. How could survivors reconnect with a past that had been systematically erased? How could Angkor inspire when its invocation had justified horror? Yet resilience emerged from devastation. Survivors began teaching what they remembered. Former monks, returning to rebuilt pagodas, reconstructed rituals from memory. Musicians, lacking instruments, hummed classical melodies to young students. At Angkor, villagers resumed traditional offerings despite official atheism. These small acts of cultural recovery, multiplied across the nation, began the long process of healing. By 1980, Cambodia existed but barely functioned. The population was reduced by a quarter. Infrastructure was destroyed. Institutions had vanished. Traditional culture survived only in fragments. Yet from this absolute nadir would come gradual resurrection, demonstrating again the Khmer capacity for survival against seemingly impossible odds. The 1980s dawned with Cambodia isolated, traumatized, and struggling for basic survival. Yet from this lowest point began one of history's most remarkable cultural resurrections. The restoration of Angkor, both as physical monument and spiritual symbol, would parallel Cambodia's broader recovery from genocide. This process, requiring international cooperation, technical innovation, and profound resilience, demonstrated how heritage could heal even the deepest wounds while presenting new challenges for preservation and development. The People's Republic of Kampuchea, governing under Vietnamese protection, faced staggering challenges. Basic infrastructure required rebuilding before cultural concerns could be addressed. Yet the government understood that legitimacy required more than rice and roads. It demanded reconnection with the Khmer past that the Khmer Rouge had tried to erase. Minister of Culture Cheng Phon, himself a survivor, began the delicate process of cultural reconstruction with minimal resources but maximum determination. Initial efforts focused on human capacity. The few surviving artists, craftsmen, and scholars were gathered to transmit their knowledge. Master sculptor Pich Keo, who had hidden in rural villages, began teaching students traditional stone carving techniques. Classical dance teachers, some missing limbs from torture, demonstrated positions to young girls who would carry forward the tradition. These transmission sessions, often conducted in damaged buildings without proper supplies, represented acts of profound faith in cultural continuity. At Angkor, the situation appeared desperate. Dense vegetation had reclaimed many structures. Bat guano covered bas reliefs. Structural damage from neglect threatened collapse. Most critically, landmines planted during successive conflicts made many areas inaccessible. The Conservation d'Angkor workshop lay in ruins, its tools looted or destroyed. The handful of surviving technical staff lacked resources for even basic maintenance. International engagement began tentatively. Polish conservators, working through socialist solidarity, arrived in 1981 to assess damage. Their reports confirmed fears. While catastrophic destruction had been avoided, systematic neglect threatened long-term survival. Water infiltration weakened foundations. Tree roots split stones. Without intervention, natural processes would accomplish what war had not. Angkor's final dissolution. The end of Cold War dynamics transformed possibilities. The Paris Peace Agreements of 1991 created frameworks for international cooperation. UNESCO, finally able to engage officially, launched emergency appeals. The International Coordinating Committee for Angkor, established in 1993, brought together experts from competing nations in common cause. Japanese, French, German, Indian, and American teams began arriving, each adopting specific monuments for restoration. The inscription of Angkor as a World Heritage Site in 1992 marked a turning point. This designation, recognizing universal value while respecting Cambodian sovereignty, provided frameworks for systematic conservation. More importantly, it restored international pride in Khmer heritage. Cambodians saw the world celebrating what the Khmer Rouge had tried to destroy, validating cultural identity through global recognition. Technical innovations revolutionized conservation approaches. Laser scanning created precise three-dimensional records, preserving information even if physical structures deteriorated. Ground-penetrating radar revealed buried foundations and hidden chambers. Chemical analysis determined original construction techniques and materials. Satellite imagery tracked vegetation encroachment and visitor impact. These technologies, unimaginable to earlier conservators, enabled interventions of unprecedented precision. The restoration philosophy evolved through sometimes heated debates. French teams, drawing on colonial-era expertise, favored minimal intervention preserving authentic ruins. Japanese experts promoted more aggressive reconstruction, returning monuments to presumed original states. Indian conservators emphasized living religious functions over archaeological purity. These different approaches, initially conflicting, eventually enriched understanding of how heritage serves multiple purposes. Economic transformation accompanied physical restoration. Tourism, negligible during the 1980s, exploded following political stabilization. Visitor numbers rose from thousands to millions annually. The Angkor Archaeological Park, established to manage access, became Cambodia's primary foreign exchange earner. Hotels, restaurants, and handicraft shops proliferated around Siem Reap. For the first time since the Angkorian era, the temples directly supported large populations. This tourism boom created new challenges. Massive foot traffic eroded ancient stones. Vehicle emissions damaged delicate carvings. Groundwater extraction for hotels threatened temple foundations. Most problematically, economic pressures encouraged unsustainable development. The challenge became balancing preservation with the legitimate needs of a desperately poor nation seeing heritage as economic salvation. Cultural revival paralleled physical restoration. The Royal Ballet, reconstituted from survivors, began performing at Angkor itself. These performances, staged against temple backdrops, created powerful connections between past and present. Traditional crafts, silk weaving, silver working, stone carving, experienced renaissance as tourists sought authentic Cambodian products. The Royal University of Fine Arts, reopened in 1989, trained new generations in classical traditions. Religious life also regenerated at Angkor. Buddhist ceremonies banned for years resumed at ancient shrines. Spirit mediums conducted rituals invoking Neek-Tay, guardian spirits, protecting specific sites. Hindu celebrations at Angkor Wat attracted regional pilgrims. This religious diversity, reflecting Angkor's syncretic history, enriched the monument's meaning beyond mere archaeological significance. The authority for the protection and management of Angkor and the region of Siem Reap, Apsara, established in 1995, represented national capacity building. Cambodian archaeologists, trained internationally, assumed leadership roles. Local communities gained employment as guards, guides, and craftsmen. Revenue-sharing arrangements ensured some tourist income supported nearby villages. This localization of management, though imperfect, moved beyond colonial models toward sustainable stewardship. Scientific discoveries continued reshaping understanding. LiDAR technology revealed vast urban complexes surrounding the temples, confirming Angkor as one of history's largest pre-industrial cities. Analysis of climate records suggested environmental factors in the empire's decline. DNA studies of contemporary populations traced continuities with ancient inhabitants. Each discovery reinforced Angkor's significance while raising new preservation challenges. By the early 2000s, Angkor had achieved remarkable transformation. The major monuments were structurally stabilized. Visitor facilities met international standards. Conservation training programs produced skilled Cambodian technicians. Most significantly, national pride in Angkorian heritage had fully recovered from the Khmer Rouge's attempted erasure. School children studied their history. Artists drew inspiration from classical motifs. Politicians across the spectrum invoked Angkorian greatness. Yet success brought new dilemmas. Mass tourism, while economically vital, threatened the monument's atmosphere and integrity. Climate change introduced unprecedented conservation challenges. Development pressures encroached on protected zones. Looting, driven by international art markets, targeted remote sites. The digital age created virtual accessibility but also enabled trafficking networks. Most fundamentally, the question arose, could Angkor remain both living heritage and preserved monument? These challenges reflected broader tensions in contemporary Cambodia. Rapid development coexisted with desperate poverty. International engagement brought resources but also dependencies. Cultural pride competed with globalized homogenization. The temples stood at these intersections, simultaneously universal heritage and national property, tourist destination and sacred space, archaeological site and living culture. Managing these multiplicities required wisdom matching that of Angkor's original builders. The 21st century has positioned Angkor at the intersection of unprecedented opportunities and existential challenges. As Cambodia emerges from decades of conflict into rapid modernization, the ancient temples serve simultaneously as economic engine, cultural anchor, and cautionary tale. The management of this heritage, balancing preservation with development, authenticity with accessibility, local needs with universal values, offers lessons extending far beyond Cambodia's borders about humanity's relationship with its past. Modern Angkor exists in multiple dimensions. Physically, it encompasses over 400 square kilometers containing dozens of major temples and hundreds of smaller sites. Economically, it generates billions in tourism revenue, supporting hundreds of thousands of livelihoods. Culturally, it remains central to Khmer identity, appearing on currency, flags, and corporate logos. Spiritually, it continues as an active religious site where Buddhism and Hinduism intersect with indigenous beliefs. Managing these overlapping realities requires constant negotiation. The digital revolution has transformed Angkor's global presence. Virtual tours allow worldwide access without physical impact. Social media spreads images instantly, creating both appreciation and over-tourism. Dating apps geotag at temple sites, trivializing sacred spaces. Drone photography reveals new perspectives while violating traditional boundaries. These technologies democratize heritage while challenging conventional conservation paradigms designed for a pre-digital world. Climate change poses existential threats that ancient builders never anticipated. Extreme weather events, unprecedented floods followed by severe droughts, stress structures designed for predictable monsoon patterns. Rising temperatures accelerate stone deterioration through thermal expansion. Changed precipitation patterns affect the water table, potentially destabilizing foundations that have stood for centuries. These challenges require adaptive strategies, combining traditional knowledge with cutting-edge science. The COVID-19 pandemic provided an unexpected experiment in tourism-free conservation. When international travel ceased in 2020, Angkor experienced silence unknown for decades. Nature immediately responded. Wildlife returned, vegetation flourished, spiritual atmosphere intensified. Yet economic devastation accompanied ecological recovery. Communities dependent on tourism faced starvation. The experience starkly illustrated both tourism's destructive impact and its vital necessity for local survival. Contemporary conservation efforts increasingly emphasize sustainability and community engagement. The concept of living heritage recognizes that monuments gain meaning through use, not mere preservation. Local communities, long marginalized from decision-making, now participate in management planning. Traditional knowledge, previously dismissed as unscientific, informs conservation strategies. This participatory approach, though sometimes messy, creates stakeholders invested in long-term preservation. Scientific research continues yielding revolutionary insights. Environmental archaeology reveals how the Khmer mastered landscape management before ultimate ecological collapse. Isotope analysis of human remains indicates ancient diet and migration patterns. Artificial intelligence analyzes inscriptions, decoding damaged texts. Each discovery reinforces Angkor's relevance to contemporary challenges: urban planning, water management, social organization, environmental balance. The illicit antiquities trade remains a persistent threat. Despite international conventions and increased vigilance, looters continue targeting remote sites. Sophisticated networks smuggle artifacts through neighboring countries to international markets. Digital technologies enable both trafficking and prevention. Online auctions facilitate sales while database imaging helps identify stolen pieces. The challenge requires coordinated international enforcement matching the criminal's organization. Educational initiatives work to ensure cultural transmission to new generations. The curriculum in Cambodian schools emphasizes Angkorian history, but struggles to make ancient achievements relevant to modern youth. University programs train archaeologists, conservators, and heritage managers, building national capacity. International scholarships enable advanced study while risking brain drain. Balancing global expertise with local rootedness remains an ongoing challenge. Economic diversification efforts seek to reduce tourism dependence while maintaining heritage values. Craft villages produce authentic replicas, providing employment while protecting originals. Agricultural projects revive ancient techniques, marketing Angkorian rice at premium prices. Cultural performances extend beyond classical dance to include contemporary interpretations. These initiatives, though sometimes criticized as commercialization, create sustainable livelihoods connected to heritage. Political dimensions complicate heritage management. Different parties invoke Angkor to support varying visions of Cambodian identity and development. International involvement, while providing resources, raises questions of sovereignty. Regional tensions, particularly with Thailand over contested temples, demonstrate how heritage becomes weaponized in contemporary disputes. Navigating these political currents requires diplomatic skills matching those of ancient kings. The question of authenticity grows increasingly complex. Which Angkor should be preserved? The pristine original, the romantic ruin, or the living religious site? Restoration decisions involve value judgments about historical periods and cultural meanings. Virtual reconstructions offer one solution, allowing multiple Angkors to coexist digitally. Yet physical interventions require choices with irreversible consequences. These philosophical debates, seemingly abstract, determine concrete conservation actions. Future scenarios range from optimistic to catastrophic. Best-case projections envision Angkor as a model for sustainable heritage management, balancing preservation with community development. Advanced technologies could enable non-invasive conservation, while virtual access reduces physical impact. Climate adaptation might demonstrate resilient strategies applicable worldwide. Cultural transmission could create new artistic traditions rooted in ancient wisdom. Pessimistic possibilities include environmental collapse, over-tourism, or political instability, destroying what centuries preserved. Climate change could trigger catastrophic flooding or drought. Mass tourism might overwhelm carrying capacity. Regional conflicts could make sites inaccessible. Economic pressures might prioritize short-term exploitation over long-term preservation. These risks, while not inevitable, require proactive management. The deeper question concerns relevance. Why should an impoverished nation prioritize ancient stones over contemporary needs? The answer lies in Angkor's demonstration that Cambodians once achieved greatness and can again. The temples prove that sophisticated civilization arose from this landscape, inspiring confidence in future possibilities. Heritage provides not just tourist income, but cultural capital essential for national development. International cooperation offers hope. The Angkor model, despite imperfections, shows how humanity can unite around shared heritage. Former enemies collaborate in conservation. Competing nations contribute expertise. Global institutions provide frameworks for protection. This cooperation, transcending political divisions, suggests possibilities for addressing other transnational challenges. As dawn breaks over Angkor Wat's towers, as it has for 9 centuries, the temple stands as testament to human achievement and warning about hubris. The same innovative water management that enabled Angkor's rise contributed to its fall. The monuments celebrating divine kingship outlasted the political system they embodied. These ironies offer lessons for contemporary civilization facing its own sustainability challenges. The future of Angkor, and by extension Cambodia, depends on wisdom matching that of its ancient builders. This means understanding heritage not as frozen past, but as living inspiration. It requires balancing preservation with development, tradition with innovation, local needs with universal values. Most fundamentally, it demands recognizing that Angkor's true monument isn't stone, but spirit, the resilience, creativity, and adaptability that enabled the Khmer to build magnificently, survive catastrophe, and continue renewing their civilization across centuries. The story of Angkor thus remains unfinished, its next chapters being written by contemporary Cambodians and global citizens who recognize that preserving this heritage preserves something essential about human possibility itself. In caring for these ancient stones, we care for our collective capacity to create beauty, meaning, and sustainable civilization. Lessons as vital for our future as understanding our past. The story of the Khmer Empire stands as one of history's most extraordinary sagas of human achievement, resilience, and transformation. from humble origins along the Mekong River to becoming Southeast Asia's dominant power, from creating architectural wonders that still inspire awe to surviving near extinction, the Khmer journey illuminates timeless truths about civilization itself. We began with scattered communities learning to harness the monsoons, transforming seasonal floods into agricultural abundance. The genius of early kings like Jayavarman II lay not merely in military conquest, but in creating ideological frameworks, the Devaraja cult, that unified diverse peoples under divine authority. This synthesis of indigenous traditions with Indian concepts produced something entirely new, a distinctly Southeast Asian model of sacred kingship. The classical period saw this synthesis reach full flower. Successive rulers built increasingly ambitious temples, each proclaiming cosmic order through stone. The hydraulic engineering that supported these projects, vast barrays and intricate canal systems, demonstrated human mastery over nature. Yet this very mastery contained seeds of eventual downfall, as environmental exploitation reached unsustainable levels. Angkor Wat, that supreme achievement of Suryavarman II, represents the apex of Khmer civilization. Its perfect proportions, encoding astronomical observations in stone, show a society confident in its understanding of cosmic order. The bas-reliefs, depicting mythological scenes with unprecedented sophistication, reveal artistic achievement, matching any civilization. Yet this monument to divine kingship was built even as the ideological system it celebrated began fragmenting. Jayavarman VII's Buddhist revolution attempted to transform divine kingship into compassionate service. His frenetic construction, hospitals, rest houses, the enigmatic bayon, showed how royal power could serve humanity. Yet the exhaustion from constant mobilization weakened the very society he sought to save. The religious conflicts following his reign revealed deep fractures that external pressures would eventually shatter. Environmental degradation, economic transformation, and military defeats combined to make Angkor unsustainable. The abandonment of the great city showed pragmatic adaptation, choosing survival over glory. The post-Angkor kingdoms, though diminished in power, preserved Khmer identity through centuries of foreign pressure. This resilience would prove crucial when facing colonialism's challenges. French colonialism brought paradoxical consequences, subjugation accompanied by rediscovery. Angkor's restoration to world consciousness inspired nationalist pride, even as Cambodia lost independence. The post-colonial period saw ambitious attempts to balance tradition with modernization, ultimately failing amid Cold War pressures. The Khmer Rouge catastrophe represented absolute nadir, an attempt to erase history itself. Yet from this darkness came remarkable resurrection. The restoration of Angkor paralleled Cambodia's broader recovery, demonstrating how heritage can heal even genocide's wounds. Today's challenges, mass tourism, climate change, development pressures, require wisdom matching that of ancient builders. The Khmer story ultimately transcends specific dates and dynasties. It reveals how human creativity can transform challenging environments into magnificent civilizations. It warns how environmental exploitation and ideological rigidity can undermine the greatest achievements. Most profoundly, it demonstrates resilience, how cultures can survive catastrophe and renewal themselves while maintaining essential identity. As Angkor's temples stand sentinel over Cambodia's future, they remind us that true monuments aren't built of stone, but of spirit. The same innovative capacity, adaptive genius, and cultural resilience that created Angkor Wat continue in contemporary Cambodians facing modern challenges. Understanding this history isn't merely academic exercise, but essential wisdom for navigating our own civilizational challenges. The rise and fall of the Khmer Empire thus speaks not just to the past, but to the eternal human challenge of building sustainable, meaningful societies that honor both tradition and transformation.